He smiled at me over breakfast that morning, like everything was fine, like our marriage wasn't crumbling, like I hadn't found unopened bills and overdue notices piling up on our kitchen counter, like he hadn't disappeared behind closed doors 4 times in an hour to take phone calls I wasn't supposed to hear. Yeah, she's coming. No, she doesn't know. I told you, it's handled. I heard those words through the hallway wall. I told myself it was work. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong about almost everything that morning. But the one thing I got right, the one thing that saved my life, was walking back into that bedroom and paying attention to what I saw on his laptop screen before he slammed it shut. One word, in bold at the top of a web page: beneficiary. 2 hours later, I was at the airport, almost at the gate, already half convinced I was overthinking everything, when a security officer grabbed my arm, looked over her shoulder, and spoke in a voice so low I had to lean in to hear her. Listen to me. Do not board that flight. And that was just the beginning. Financial abuse and emotional manipulation don't always look the way we expect. Sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is already sitting across the breakfast table. Awareness is your armor. Watch until the end, and if this hit close to home, share it. Someone in your life may need to see this right now. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that educate, empower, and remind us to see clearly. This content was researched, built, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaning, awareness, and real-life lessons.
The last real memory Kayla has of her husband, the one that loops in her mind like a corrupted video file, is the hug he gave her in the middle of the airport security line. Derek had orchestrated their entire trip, but when his arms wrapped around her, it wasn't an embrace. It was a cage, stiff and cold, pushing her away even as he held her. Then, just as quickly, he let go, turned his back, and vanished into the crowd without a second glance. She was still fumbling for her boarding pass when a federal agent materialized in front of her. His voice was low, yet it sliced through the terminal's cacophony. "Ma'am, I need you to listen very carefully. You will not be getting on this flight. Please, come with us now." Kayla would later say that the words didn't even register, not until the full, monstrous weight of what Derek had engineered came crashing down around her moments later, shattering her world into a million unrecognizable pieces. This is her story. As investigators would later piece together, the elaborate charade began its slow, toxic bloom nearly 3 months earlier. What Derek had sold as a romantic getaway was, in reality, a meticulously crafted final journey, a one-way ticket for his wife, a trip from which she was never meant to come home. Today, Kayla is back in her classroom at Northwood High. You can almost see her there, standing before 23 teenagers glued to their phones, the familiar Seattle drizzle streaking down the windows. The diamond ring Derek once slid onto her finger now sits in a sterile plastic bag in a police evidence locker hundreds of miles away. She can still conjure the image of Derek's smile on the morning of September 12th, around 7:30 a.m. Their kitchen smelled of his idea of romance, overcooked French toast, as he slid a flimsy white envelope across the table. "Got a little surprise for you," he'd chirped. But, as Kayla later admitted, some primal instinct buried deep in her gut was screaming at her to just get up and run for her life. In hindsight, the warning signs were practically fireworks in the dark. The subtle tremor in his hands as he passed her the envelope, the way his gaze skittered away from hers, even the cheap, sloppy tape he'd used to seal it. But she suffocated that doubt. clinging to the 8 years of history they had built, a foundation she desperately needed to believe was solid. Tucked inside were a pair of first-class tickets for a 4-day escape to Las Vegas, complete with a reservation for a suite at the Bellagio. It was the exact fantasy trip they'd sketched out in 2015, newlyweds dreaming big while he was a junior law associate, and she was pulling in maybe $32,000 a year. Derek, this is insane, she'd said, a real smile finally wrestling past her anxiety. How can we possibly afford this? He reached for her hand, his own feeling slick and cold against her skin. We can now, he insisted, launching into a well-rehearsed monologue about their growing distance, about therapy failing them, and how this was their last chance to salvage what they had. She couldn't argue with him. An emotional chasm had opened between them. After a drunk driver killed both of her parents in March of 2021, she had unraveled. Derek, in turn, had simply checked out, retreating into the blue light of his phone and phantom late nights at the office, right up until his firm laid him off in November of 2022. By January, they were little more than roommates splitting a mortgage payment. A Vegas splurge felt less like a solution and more like a desperate, reckless act. Our anniversary isn't until October 3rd, she noted. She saw a flicker of raw fury in his eyes before he plastered on another smile. I know, he said. Why wait? Let's just be spontaneous, Kay. You remember what that feels like, don't you? And God, she did. She remembered a last-minute drive to Portland, singing classic rock terribly off-key with the windows down. She remembered him proposing in a city park with a handful of daisies because he couldn't afford a ring. She remembered the way he used to look at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. She just couldn't remember when he'd started looking right through her. Fine, she heard the word leave her lips. Okay, let's do it. The smile he offered in return was terrifyingly empty. The next hour was a frantic blur. Derek was strangely adamant that she pack only a single small carry-on bag, watching her every move like a predator. At one point, he crossed the room, unzipped the front pocket of her suitcase, peered inside, and zipped it shut again. What are you even looking for? She asked, forcing a laugh. Just making sure my girl has everything she needs, he replied, planting a kiss on her forehead that felt as cold as a stone. His phone buzzed 4 separate times as she packed, each call sending him scurrying into the bedroom. She could only hear broken phrases. Yes, she's coming. No, she has no idea. I told you it's already handled. When he emerged after the 4th call, she was standing there. Who was on the phone? She asked. Just work, he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. But his consulting business hadn't generated a single dollar in over 6 months. The stack of unopened, angry red envelopes on the kitchen counter told the real story. One letter detailed a second mortgage on their house she knew nothing about. Another was a final notice from a debt collector that sounded threatening. I thought you said we could afford this, she said, her voice a fragile whisper. His jaw tightened. I said I'm handling it, Kayla. For once in your life, can you just trust me? The question was a punch to the gut, because for 8 long years, she had. She had trusted him with every last cent of her parents' life insurance settlement. $3.8 million he swore he was expertly investing for their future. He would even produce intricate spreadsheets filled with fictional numbers to chart their supposed growth. It had never once occurred to her to actually log in and check the bank statements herself. I do trust you, she answered, the lie scorching her throat. He pulled her into another one of his tense, performative hugs. It was then that she smelled it. A sharp, expensive new cologne she'd never smelled on him before. As he held her, her eyes drifted over his shoulder to his open laptop on the dining table. For a split second before the screen went dark, she saw an online insurance form with a single word at the top in large, bold letters: beneficiary. Derek noticed her gaze and slammed the laptop shut. "Battery's dying," he said, his voice an octave too high. "I'll just charge it in the car." Kayla let it go, suddenly terrified of what she might uncover if she pushed any harder. At 9:15, he grabbed her bag, insisting on putting it in the trunk himself. As they merged onto the highway, his knuckles were bone white on the steering wheel, as his eyes darted frantically to the rearview mirror every few seconds. "I'm fine," he snapped when she asked what was wrong. "Just don't want to miss the flight." Their plane wasn't scheduled for departure until 10:30. They were almost comically early. Kayla said nothing, just turned her head and watched the gray silhouette of the Seattle skyline recede in the distance. Her thoughts drifted to a text from her best friend Chloe the night before. "You sure about this? Derek's been acting so off lately." Kayla had typed back a simple reply: "He's trying. I need to meet him halfway." Now, sitting beside the man she married as he drove like a man escaping a crime scene, she was sick with the realization that Chloe had been right all along. "Trust me, Kay," Derek said again, his voice strained with an unnerving intensity. "This trip is going to change everything." He could not have been more right. What he didn't know was that in less than 2 hours, a federal agent would utter a few quiet words that would save his wife's life and utterly demolish his own. The drive from their house to the airport usually took 35 minutes in light traffic. Kayla glanced at the dashboard clock. Derek had made it in 22. He was cutting through lanes and tailgating, driving with a desperate, hunted energy. Her own knuckles were white from gripping the passenger side door handle. "Derek, please slow down," she begged. "We have more than enough time." He didn't even look at her, his gaze just ricocheting between the asphalt ahead and the mirror behind. When she reminded him again that their flight wasn't until 10:30, he just ground his teeth. "Not taking any chances," he muttered. "Security lines could be a nightmare." It was just after 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. The roads were wide open, but she let it go. She had learned over the last year that arguing with him when he was in this state was like reasoning with a brick wall. So she sat in silence, watching the familiar landscape of her life blur into the anonymous sprawl of the airport. His phone buzzed again, the call automatically connecting to the car's Bluetooth speakers. "Yeah," he answered, his voice coiled tight. The voice that replied was male, gruff, and distorted by a poor connection. Kayla couldn't make out all the words, but the man's tone was clear. It was aggressive and demanding. "I told you, it's handled." Derek snapped into the charged silence of the car, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Flight 447, it's at 10:30. The policy is active as of this morning. I already confirmed." A tidal wave of pure, icy dread crashed over Kayla. Derek frantically jabbed at the steering wheel, ending the call. He immediately cranked the volume on the radio, blasting a wall of aggressive rock music that suffocated the air. Kayla just stared at the side of his face, at the corded muscles in his neck, and the frantic pulse hammering in his jaw. "Who was that?" she yelled over the noise. He shot her a look, just for a second, and the raw, cornered desperation in his eyes made her wish she had never found the courage to ask. Looking back, Derek knew that was the fork in the road. Right there, on the interstate, he could have hit the brakes, shifted into park, and finally let the ugly truth spill out all over the pristine interior of their car. Instead, he just kept his eyes glued to the asphalt. This new venture of his, this consulting gig he was so vague about, was a world of smoke and mirrors built around one high stakes client and a situation that was, to use his favorite new adjective, complicated. For the past 6 months since the layoff from the firm, his entire life had become complicated. The growing mountain of final notices, the credit cards groaning under the strain, the chilling fact that Kayla's modest teacher's paycheck was the only thing between them and foreclosure. It was all just so damn complicated. And yet, a pair of last-minute first-class tickets to Las Vegas was somehow a simple transaction. As Kayla sat there, completely blindsided, her phone buzzed to life. The caller ID flashed Megan Miller. The preview of the text was a gut punch. "Kayla, Mom fell. Call me." Megan wasn't just a friend. She was the sister Kayla chose, the anchor who'd held her steady when her parents were killed. She was also the one who, just a month ago, had looked Kayla dead in the eye and said that her buddy Derek was radiating a 5-alarm weirdness and that maybe, just to be safe, she ought to find a lawyer. Kayla had waved it away then, dismissed it as Megan's classic overthinking. But as her thumb hovered over the screen, poised to call her friend, Derek's arms snaked across the console, and he plucked the phone from her grasp. It happened so fast, the shock came before the rage. "You can call her back when we land," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth, as he dropped her phone into a cup holder just beyond her reach. That was it. That was the first tremor before the whole world came crashing down around her. "We're going to miss the flight," Derek stated, his voice wound tight. "No, we're not," Kayla replied, fighting to keep her own voice even. "It's only 9:15. And in that instant, he transformed. "Kayla," he said, his tone dropping several degrees and sucking the warmth from the car. "Can you please, for one single second, just trust me to handle things?" When Derek weaponized the word please, it wasn't a question. It was a threat. She watched his knuckles turn white as he strangled the steering wheel. She would tell him later that a vein was pulsing at his temple, a violent, angry rhythm. She was desperately searching his face for a trace of the man she had promised her life to 8 years prior. The man who could send her into fits of laughter, who would grab her for a spontaneous dance while she was making spaghetti. He was supposed to be her safe place. But the person at the wheel was an absolute stranger. Her thoughts snapped back to a call from March 10th, 2021. A state trooper using sterile, horrible words like fatal collision and deceased at the scene to inform her that both of her parents were gone. In the wake of that call, her life became a blur of grief. A check for $3.8 million arrived in the mail 6 weeks later. Her father, a gifted engineer, and her mother, a librarian, had meticulously planned for her future. But Kayla was so lost in a fog she could hardly breathe, so she endorsed the check and handed it to Derek. He was her husband, my close friend. He was going to invest it, grow it, and build their forever with it. He assured her it was all taken care of. Through all the months that followed, she never once asked for a bank statement. Not a single one. "Derek," she finally asked in the car, her voice hard as stone, "what happened to my parents' money?" He refused to look at her. He just kept driving, the speedometer creeping past 80 in a 60-mile-per-hour zone. "It's fine, Kayla," he clipped out. "It's in the market." "Then why," she pushed, "are we getting calls from debt collectors every day?" His entire jaw tightened. "That's old debt," he snapped back. "From before all this. I'm dealing with it." "How? How are you dealing with anything when you lost your job?" That was the question that broke him. His fist came down on the steering wheel with a sickening thud, causing the car to swerve violently across the yellow line. Kayla screamed, her hand flying to the door handle. He wrenched the car back into their lane, his breathing ragged and heavy. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "There are things you just don't understand. But this trip," he pleaded, his voice cracking with a sudden raw desperation. "Kayla, this is the fix. This is what makes it all right again. I just need you to trust me." It was his go-to line, the magic word she always fell for. Because the alternative, that the man she'd built her world around was a fraud, that her inheritance was gone, that their life was a lie, was a possibility too monstrous to contemplate. So she fell silent, turning to watch the gray landscape blur past her window. They arrived at the SeaTac departures curb at exactly 9:38. Derek didn't even bother looking for parking. He just slammed on the brakes, leaving the engine running as she wrestled her own suitcase from the trunk. "I'll meet you at the gate," he called after her. She stood there on the curb, stunned. "You're not even walking in with me?" "I've got to return something right near here," he said, the excuse spilling out in a rush. "I'll be right behind you. 20 minutes tops, gate C7. Before she could protest, he was almost herding her toward the sliding doors. "Kayla, you have to go. You'll miss the bag drop." And with that, he left her alone on the sidewalk, watching his taillights disappear into the flow of traffic, without so much as a backward glance. She turned and pushed through the automatic doors, hit by that sterile airport smell of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. She was walking toward a gate, toward a vacation, toward a life that was about to be irrevocably shattered. What she couldn't possibly know was that the version of Kayla who walked into that terminal would cease to exist before the day was over. The security line snaked forward with a numb, automated efficiency that Tuesday morning. Maybe 20 people stood ahead of her, a family wrangling toddlers, a businessman barking into his phone, a student lost in her music. Just an ordinary cross-section of humanity. To any of them, she must have looked completely normal. Just another traveler with a boarding pass, trying to ignore the image of her husband peeling away from the curb like he was escaping a fire. And then, through the massive wall of glass that divided the terminal, she saw the impossible. He hadn't left. He was standing near a Starbucks kiosk, a good 20 yards beyond her security checkpoint, on the public side where people without tickets belong, and his gaze was fixed directly on her. Kayla told me she physically froze, her mind scrambling to process what she was seeing. Had he forgotten something? But he made no move toward the airline counters. He was just watching her, phone in his hand, with an unnerving focus that felt less like affection and more like surveillance. It was the look of a man confirming a package was en route. And that was when a TSA agent, a woman with her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, noticed him too. The officer glanced from Derek to a colleague, and then her gaze snapped back to him, her eyes narrowing. She spoke low into the radio clipped to her shoulder. At the front of the line, a younger agent named Austin beckoned Kayla forward. He checked her driver's license against her ticket, glanced from the photo to her face, and returned them. "Gate C7, enjoy your flight," She felt like she was wading through water as she put her laptop and shoes into a gray plastic bin. As she stepped through the full body scanner and raised her arms, the world went silent. It was a false quiet. The only threat she was carrying was the toxic, sickening certainty that boarding that aircraft was the single most dangerous thing she could possibly do. After she laced her sneakers back on, she risked one last look through the glass partition. Derek was no longer at the Starbucks. A wild hope flared for a split second before she spotted him, half hidden in an alcove by the men's restroom. His back was to her now, his phone clamped to his ear, his free hand slicing through the air with a desperate, furious energy. And the TSA officer, the one with the severe bun, was now walking with calm purpose directly toward him. I learned her name later, Officer Maria Sanchez. She'd been on the job for 18 years. 18 years of scanning faces, confiscating water bottles, and reminding people to remove their belts. For 18 years, her entire profession had been built on recognizing the small, discordant notes in the symphony of human behavior. She'd probably been accused of being paranoid more times than she could count. But she wasn't paranoid. She was an expert. And at that moment, all Kayla knew was that this uniformed stranger was staring at her husband with the same kind of bone-deep alarm that was currently clawing its way up her own throat. Officer Sanchez moved past Kayla's position, her pace steady and professional, but her eyes were locked on Derek. Her hand was resting on her radio. As she neared the alcove where he was practically spitting venom into his phone, she angled her head slightly, straining to hear. Even from where Kayla stood, she could sense the harsh, frantic timbre of his voice. It was the sound of a man terrified of being overheard. Kayla couldn't decipher a single word, but Officer Sanchez could. It wouldn't be until hours later, in a sterile interview room with a detective named Miller, that Kayla would finally find out what he was saying. Not from a recording, but from the typewritten report Officer Sanchez radioed in at 9:51 a.m. I've read the official transcript they presented in court. It's so procedural, so devoid of emotion. It turns my best friend's husband into a specimen under a microscope. Miller, a checkpoint C. I have a possible code yellow. Subject is a Caucasian male, mid-30s, arrived in a gray Lexus, now loitering on the non-secure side. I have overheard subject on a call mentioning flight 447, gate C7, and that a $2 million policy is active if a casualty occurs. Subject also stated, she's past security, it's a go. Requesting law enforcement intercept at gate C7. For Kayla Vance, it was 9:51 on a Tuesday morning, a perfectly ordinary time on a perfectly ordinary day. But then, she felt the presence, a quickening of steps just behind her left shoulder, and a voice cut through the airport noise. Ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am. She turned, and the woman was standing impossibly close, a uniformed TSA agent whose proximity was so immediate, Kayla could see the faint, silvery line of a scar above her right eyebrow. The agent's name tag was stark white against her dark blue uniform, the lettering simple and official. Miller, J. A smaller line of text beneath it declared her status. TSA officer, 18 years service. Agent Miller spoke with a quiet, practiced cadence, the kind of voice engineered to prevent panic. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. Derek had always said Kayla was warm-blooded, but a profound, freezing chill flooded her veins in an instant. What did I do? She managed to ask. You aren't in trouble, the agent replied, her tone solid but not accusatory. It was the voice of someone who hated being the messenger of devastation. But I need to ask a few questions about your flight. You have to understand Derek Vance to understand what happened next. To the casual observer, he was the picture of the doting husband dropping his wife, Kayla, off for a girls' trip to Vegas. He'd given her a long kiss at the curb, a final wave from the Starbucks near security. He had played the part down to the last detail. He watched her disappear toward the sea gates, her flight scheduled to board in under half an hour. But just as she neared her gate, a federal agent intercepted her, steering her not toward the jet bridge, but toward a featureless gray door marked Authorized Personnel Only. And that is where, for all intents and purposes, Kayla Vance's world came to an end. She would later tell him the terror wasn't a sudden crash, but a slow, creeping tide of ice water. It seeped into her bones as she walked beside the agent. In a voice that was barely more than a breath, she asked if her flight had been canceled. Agent Jen Miller was maddeningly vague, offering a week, "It might be nothing." But Kayla saw her eyes flick back toward the Starbucks where Derek had been standing only moments before. He was gone. "The man you were just with, your husband," Agent Miller began, and when Kayla nodded, she felt the first true crack in the foundation of her life. "He made a phone call that scared the hell out of me," Miller stated, her voice stripped of all professional courtesy now. With those words, everything solid in Kayla's universe dissolved into smoke. Her knees buckled, and she had to brace a hand against the cold concourse wall to stay upright, as the agent's hand gently but firmly gripped her arm. "Ma'am, stay with me. You're safe now, but you have to come with me immediately." For Derek Vance, the clock had been ticking, but with that one overheard conversation, his entire desperate, pathetic house of cards had already come crashing down. As if summoned from the air itself, two airport police officers materialized, taking up positions flanking Kayla and the agent. The senior officer, a sergeant, gave a short nod to Miller. "Detective Reed is on his way," he said. "ETA 5 minutes." The word hung in the sterile air of the terminal, heavy and out of place. "Detective? A detective?" Kayla whispered, the sound fracturing as it left her lips. "Why on earth would I need a detective?" For the first time, Agent Miller's gaze met hers directly, and her expression was a mask of awful, undeniable certainty. It wasn't pity Kayla saw in the agent's eyes. It was something colder, a flicker of grim recognition, as if she'd seen this exact scene play out before. "I think someone's trying to hurt you," she said, the words delivered softly. A primal scream built in Kayla's chest, the need to shout that it was impossible, that Derek, her Derek, would never. But the sound died in her throat. It was choked by the phantom memory of a familiar, sick feeling, the stomach-dropping vertigo she'd felt when she learned her parents were gone. The same cold betrayal that comes when you realize your entire life has been built on a lie. Some dark, intuitive part of her already knew. As they escorted her down a sterile service hallway, the name Detective Reed was just an abstract sound, as unreal as the notion that Derek Vance, the man she had promised her life to, had just made arrangements to have it violently taken away. They led her into a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, where a man with weary but surprisingly kind eyes stood waiting for her. She would say later that those eyes were the only anchor that kept her from shattering into a million pieces. The room itself was a claustrophobic gray box, maybe 10 by 12 feet, furnished with nothing more than a scarred metal table and 3 chairs. A massive one-way mirror dominated one wall, feeling less like a window and more like a black hole. Through the fog of shock, she glanced at the wall clock, 10:02 a.m. Her plane to Vegas was scheduled to start boarding in 26 minutes. Detective Austin Reed appeared to be in his late 30s. his dark hair showing the first traces of silver at the temples. He had the exhausted face of a man who had seen the worst of people for a very long time. His Seattle PD badge was clipped to his belt, and his windbreaker had police emblazoned across the back in bright yellow letters. He sat opposite Kayla, his gaze direct and steady. He was looking at her, truly seeing her, not as an exhibit in a case file, but as a person whose life had just been torn apart. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice preternaturally calm. "I'm Detective Austin Reed with the Airport Task Force. Agent Miller has explained what she overheard your husband say on the phone." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle between them. "I have to ask you some extremely difficult questions, and it's critical that you are completely honest with me. Can you do that?" Kayla, so terrified she felt a crushing weight on her chest, could only manage a single jerky nod. "Okay, first," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Can you think of any reason why your husband, Derek, would be on a call today discussing a $2 million life insurance policy in your name?" The question was like a language she didn't speak. "A what? We don't have anything like that." Detective Reed was already opening a small black notebook. Agent Miller heard him mention Flight 447, Gate C7, and then she distinctly heard the phrase, "policies active." 2 million if something happens on that plane. "Does any of that make sense to you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Kayla just shook her head, a frantic, desperate motion. "No, Derek is a financial advisor. He talks about policies for his clients all the time, but we never." The detective's quiet voice sliced cleanly through her denial. "Mrs. Vance, I need your permission to contact your insurance provider right now, just to verify that information." "Yes, of course," she said, the words tumbling out of her, hollow and automatic. "There is no policy. This is all some kind of horrible mistake. Derek wouldn't do this." But Reed was already dialing, his thumb tapping the speakerphone icon. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Secure Life Insurance, Fraud Investigation Division. This is Jessica Cole speaking. Ms. Cole, this is Detective Austin Reed, Seattle Police Department, badge number 6247, he stated. "I'm investigating a potential fraud and threat to life situation. I need you to perform a search on a name for me. Kayla Vance. Date of birth is August 14th, 1992. The sound of furious keyboard clicking filled the suffocating silence of the small room. "Yes, sir. I am showing an active term life policy for that individual." And then came the final, devastating blow. The policyholder is listed as Kayla Ann Vance. The coverage amount is for $2 million on a 20-year term. The sole beneficiary is listed as Derek James Vance. The policy became active on March 15th, 2023, with the first year of premiums paid in a single lump sum. The gray room began to tilt and spin around her. "Email me the application and the signature page," Reed commanded, his voice now hard as steel. "Immediately." "It's on its way to you now," the woman replied. Reed ended the call and opened a laptop. Not 10 seconds later, an email popped up. He opened an attachment and swiveled the screen to face Kayla. And there it was. Her entire existence reduced to a series of checkboxes and lines on a digital form. At the very bottom was a signature that was almost hers, but felt like a grotesque parody. "That's not my signature," she breathed, her voice a ghost. Reed leaned in closer. "Are you 100% certain?" "Look at the V in Vance," she told him, her finger trembling as she pointed at the screen. "I always make my V sharp at the bottom." My mother was a librarian. She was a fanatic about penmanship. She always said a signature needed to have character. That V is rounded. She pointed again, her nail tapping the screen. And my K in Kayla. It's supposed to have a small loop at the top. That one is just made of straight lines. The detective stared intently at the screen, took a quick photo of it with his cell phone, and then slid a blank sheet of printer paper and a pen across the table toward her. Could you please sign your name for me? She signed it 3 times, her hand shaking so violently that the letters came out jagged and broken, a reflection of how she felt inside. Reed held her fresh signatures up next to the laptop screen, his jaw set like concrete. It's a forgery, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any doubt. I don't understand. Kayla's voice cracked into a sob. Why would Derek do this? Forge my signature? Detective Reed didn't bother to answer her. He was already typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a furious energy. Mrs. Vance, I need your verbal consent for an emergency warrant to access your husband's financial records. I'm talking bank statements, credit cards, everything. Yes, she choked out, the word tasting like ash. God, yes, whatever you need. After another minute of silent, frantic clicking, the detective's kind eyes went cold. According to state employment records, your husband, Derek Vance, filed for unemployment back in November of 2022. He said softly. Those benefits ran out last May. His credit report is showing a consolidated debt of $62,000 spread across 7 different credit cards. Every single one of them maxed out. Collection agencies began calling his cell phone in June, he continued, and Kayla felt the air being squeezed from her lungs. There's more, Reed said, his voice grim. He wired a series of large payments this year to a cryptocurrency exchange called Apex Digital. The total amount transferred comes to $280,000. Kayla could only whisper the source of the funds. That was my inheritance, from my parents. He told me he was investing it for our future. He told me it was a guaranteed win, she murmured to no one in particular. Mrs. Vance, I am truly sorry, the detective said, and the sincerity in his voice was a small, sharp pain. But, according to these records, those crypto investments are down 98%. As of this morning, he has about $5,000 left. He paused, allowing the sheer horror of the revelation to sink in. And there is one last thing. Your husband took out a private loan this past July for $95,000. The lender's name is Leo Price, Reed informed her. We have a rather large racketeering file on Mr. Price. He's a loan shark, and according to the terms of the loan, the full $95,000 plus interest is due in 8 days. He didn't have to explain the consequences of missing a payment to a man like that. Kayla's eyes darted to the clock on the wall. 10:18 a.m. In the cold, sterile light of that windowless room, Derek's insane, monstrous plan suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. While his wife's world was being systematically demolished, Derek Vance was falling apart. He would later confess how his hands were shaking so violently he could barely grip his phone. Back in the interrogation room, Kayla's phone, which had been placed on the table, buzzed relentlessly. Detective Reed gestured toward the screen. That's your husband, he said calmly. He's attempted to reach you 47 times since you were brought in here. Kayla stared at the screen, a waterfall of missed calls and panicked texts all under one name, the name of the man who had kissed her goodbye less than an hour ago. 47 times. Later, he would show me the messages, a digital transcript of a man completely unraveling in real time. Kayla, answer me, the first one read. Then, the desperation climbed with each passing minute from 10:06 to 10:23 a.m. Why aren't you at the gate? You're going to miss your flight. And the final pleading text. I love you. Please just get on the plane. He thinks I'm about to get on that plane, she told the detective, the full gravity of her situation finally crashing down on her. But Detective Miller offered no comfort, just the cold, hard truth. He thinks you're about to die, he corrected, his voice raspy. In a moment of cruel cosmic irony, the airport's PA system crackled to life. Final boarding call for Alaska Airlines Flight 447 to Las Vegas, now departing from Gate C7. The wall clock showed 10:28. Derek couldn't see Detective Miller leaning across the stark interrogation table, his hand covering Kayla's, not as a comfort, but as an anchor against the storm. Miller's voice was a low, urgent whisper. Kayla, he said, the moment you step onto that jet bridge, you're out of my reach. I can't know what Derek has planned, but he's a man pushed to the edge who believes he's seconds away from cashing a $2 million insurance policy. Stay here, and we can stop this. But if I don't board, she whispered, her voice fracturing, he'll realize something is off. Miller's response was swift and certain. But he won't be able to reach you. You'll still be alive. The clock ticked over to 10:29 in the morning. She later recalled picturing Derek's tight, forced smile and his empty promise that this Vegas trip would heal the fissures in their marriage. She thought of the inheritance from her parents, the $3.8 million that was supposed to be her parachute. She thought of the man she had married, the absolute faith she had placed in him, and the terrifying void that now separated them. You need to trust your instincts, Kayla, Miller pressed. In the suffocating silence of that room, she made her decision. She didn't move. 2 minutes later, the gate for Flight 447 officially closed. 12 minutes after that, it dropped from the sky. The first indication of the catastrophe wasn't a sound. The gut-wrenching roar of the impact, the fiery explosion that would soon dominate a nonstop 24-hour news cycle, hadn't yet penetrated the walls of the police station. The first sign was the sound of a dozen officers gasping as one, their faces all illuminated by their phones. An officer named Reed, standing near the doorway, saw her screen flash with a news alert, and the color instantly drained from her face. She seemed frozen by a pure, disbelieving shock. Officer Reed stared at her phone for a long second before her gaze shot up to meet Detective Miller's. Kayla, she managed to say, her voice so thin it sounded like it might snap. Flight 447. It's down. The world inside that room stopped turning. Miller was across the floor in an instant, his own face hardening like stone as he stared at the screen. He turned to Kayla, and she saw genuine devastation crack through his professional exterior. Mrs. Miller, he ordered, his voice sharp and low. I need you to take a breath. What just happened? He didn't need to explain further. He took Officer Reed's phone, angling the screen so Kayla could see the brutal headline, Pacific Airways. Flight 447 crashes into Puget Sound, moments after takeoff. No survivors expected? Kayla said the words blurred, swimming before her eyes as if written in a foreign script she couldn't comprehend, reading them again and again. A source close to the investigation gave me the number that changed everything. 156. That was the number of souls on board, a figure that nearly sent Kayla to her knees. Her first question came out as a broken whisper. How many? Detective Miller had to say it aloud. 156 passengers and crew, every single one of them gone. With a single grim nod from him, she collapsed. Miller caught her, easing her into a nearby chair. It might have been Officer Reed who offered her water, but Kayla's hands refused to cooperate, paralyzed by the horrific realization that 156 people had died because she hadn't become victim 157. "This is my fault," she whispered, but Miller immediately shut that down. He knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Kayla, you listen to me. This was not on you." He explained the plane suffered a catastrophic engine failure just 6 minutes airborne. All initial chatter pointed to a mechanical issue, not an explosive device. "Are you hearing me?" he insisted, but her mind was trapped in a loop. "If I had been on board," she reasoned, "it would just be 157 victims. That's all that would be different." His reply was pointed, not cruel, just brutally frank. "Someone specifically wanted you on that plane, Kayla." And with that, a tragic accident morphed into a hunt for a killer. At that very moment, the door swung open to reveal a man who radiated FBI, tall, dark suit, no nonsense demeanor. He strode directly to Detective Miller. "Special Agent Evans, Seattle Field Office. I'm briefed on the situation." It was time to pull the passenger manifest. As Miller stood and beckoned Evans to join them, Officer Reed moved to secure the door, locking them inside. Evans took a seat opposite Kayla. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his tone disarmingly calm, "I need to walk you through a few things. I need your full focus. Can you do that for me?" She managed a slight nod. He explained that the airline had a preliminary list from the gate. "Your name is on that manifest," he stated, and the room felt like it was tilting. "I know," she began to say, but he raised a hand to stop her. Airline records indicated her boarding pass was scanned at 10:18 that morning. They had the security footage to back it up. "That's not possible," she said. "I've been in this room with Detective Miller." He confirmed her alibi. Agent Evans then slid a tablet across the table and pressed play on a video from the gate camera. The footage showed a man in a baseball cap and dark glasses approaching the kiosk, scanning a phone, then immediately turning and walking away. The timestamp at the bottom read 10:18:03 a.m. "That's your husband, Derek," Agent Evans said without inflection. He explained that despite a cheap wig and sunglasses, their facial recognition software scored a perfect match. "My friend Derek had simply used a screenshot of the boarding pass the airline had emailed to Kayla. In the morning rush, the gate agents hadn't looked twice. But why?" Kayla asked. It was Miller who articulated the final, sickening piece of the puzzle. Derek needed to get her name onto that flight roster. He understood that when an insurance company investigates a claim from a plane crash, the very first document they demand is the official passenger manifest. If Kayla Miller's name wasn't on it, the policy was void. Agent Evans just nodded grimly. In the immediate aftermath, the airline had already transmitted that manifest to the FAA. "That list," he explained, "is generated by one simple action: a scanned boarding pass. Her name was on it." As far as the world was concerned, Kayla Miller was at the bottom of the ocean. She gripped the table to steady herself. Evans told her he'd already made a request for the airline to delay correcting the manifest for the next 48 to 72 hours. This was no longer just an accident. "We are now investigating an aviation disaster connected to insurance fraud and attempted homicide," he declared. He explained that standard protocol allowed them to suppress certain details, and the airline was fully cooperating. You want them to continue telling people I'm dead? She asked, the horror rising in her voice. There are families. People will think I'm gone. No, Miller interjected softly. There are no families searching for you. Your husband is your sole next of kin, and he already believes you are dead. Agent Evans swiped to a second video on the tablet, this one from the main terminal, timestamped at 10:51 a.m. It showed my friend Derek staring up at a news monitor as the breaking news banner crawled across the screen. You could pinpoint the exact moment his feigned concern dissolved. He pulled out his phone, likely double-checking the news, and then, for a split second, he smiled. A flicker of pure, unadulterated relief. He walked out of the airport at 11:03 a.m. I still struggle to process what Kayla recounted next. She said, Officer Reed's voice sounded like it was echoing from down a long hallway. He really thinks I'm dead, doesn't he? She had asked. Reed's answer was immediate. Yes. And right now, that's the only weapon we have. Detective Miller leaned forward, outlining how the rest of this waking nightmare would unfold. For their strategy to succeed, Derek had to remain convinced his monstrous plan had worked flawlessly. They were moving her to an unmarked safe house in Tacoma, completely off the grid, while they put her husband under intense covert surveillance. Men who believe they've committed the perfect crime get sloppy, Miller told her. He'll make a mistake. He'll message another woman, try to access her bank accounts, or file that massive insurance claim. The second he does, they would have him. How long? She whispered. 72 hours, Reed replied. Maybe less. Kayla told me she just stared at a photo on her phone of Derek smiling, the man who had vowed to love her until death did them part. It seemed he had decided to take that vow into his own hands. Reed slid a business card across the table, offering one final, bone-chilling piece of advice. The news reports were a formality, a ghost story being told to the world while the ghost sat breathing in a windowless room. Ashley Wallace's name was about to be etched onto the grim list of the fallen, a name her friends, family, and colleagues would soon read through tears. The federal agents were clear. The truth had to be contained. And so, Ashley had to accept the gut-wrenching reality that everyone she loved would soon be mourning her. I understand, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Detective Spencer slid a plain cardboard box across the steel table. It held the tools of her new non-existence. A burner phone that only called him, a single key to a life she didn't choose, and a thick wedge of cash. No credit cards, no contact, no digital footprint. For the next 3 days, Ashley Wallace was gone. All they could do was watch and wait to see what her husband, Nathan, would do, now that he believed he was a free man. The safe house had 3 deadbolts on the door and a stunning view of the Puget Sound that made Ashley's stomach turn. Every glance out the window was a fresh hell, filled with the sight of recovery vessels crisscrossing the gray water. The apartment itself was a sterile cage, 1 bedroom and a living area furnished with a cheap folding table and 2 metal chairs. On that table sat 3 laptops, their screens quartered into 12 silent black and white feeds. They were a live portal into the home she and Nathan had built, the home where he was now performing the part of the heartbroken widower. Detective Spencer was a quiet, steady fixture in the corner, nursing a cup of terrible gas station coffee, his presence a constant since her world had imploded. The cameras went live at 2 p.m., he said, his voice low. A federal judge had signed off that morning. Attempted murder and a major aviation incident provided all the probable cause they needed. They had eyes everywhere: the living room, the kitchen, the garage, the front door. The audio wasn't active yet, making it feel like watching a horror film with the sound off. And then, at 2:34 in the afternoon, Nathan's black Lexus glided into the driveway. On a small, grainy square of the monitor, Ashley watched the man she'd married step into their house. He tossed his keys onto the console table, his body language oddly hesitant, and just stood there, scanning the living room as if seeing it for the very first time. He then collapsed onto the sofa, a marionette with its strings cut. He pulled out his phone and just stared at the dark screen for what felt to Ashley like an eternity, but was in reality 5 excruciating minutes. And then he smiled. It wasn't a grin. It was a small, secret, utterly triumphant curl of the lips. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it was confirmation of everything she feared. "Did you see that?" she breathed, her voice a tremor. Spencer offered a grim, stone-jawed nod. A moment later, Nathan was in the kitchen, pulling a beer from the fridge. He took a long, hard swallow, then leaned against the counter, his shoulders shuddering with deep, ragged breaths. He looked like a man who had finally, after a long struggle, broken the surface for air. Her best friend Jessica arrived at 6:48. Ashley watched on the front door camera as Jessica's worn-out Forester pulled up. She saw her get out, clutching her purse like a shield, and ring the bell. The moment Nathan opened the door, Jessica just broke. He pulled her into an embrace, and Ashley was forced to watch her best friend sob into the shoulder of the man who had tried to kill her. She watched him pat Jessica's back, his chin resting on her hair, a pantomime of comfort. But over Jessica's heaving shoulder, his face was a placid mask, calm, emotionless. His eyes weren't filled with grief. They were methodically cataloging the room behind her. "She has no idea," Ashley choked out, the words raw in her throat. "She really thinks I'm dead." Spencer's voice was flat. "I'm sorry, we have to keep this isolated." On the screen, Jessica was talking frantically, her hands gesturing wildly, while Nathan just nodded. They moved to the couch, and Jessica pulled a casserole dish from her tote bag. Of course she did. That was Jessica. When your world implodes, she brings you lasagna. The official reports would later state that Ashley Wallace was in a profound state of shock. 156 souls were gone, and the crushing weight of being the sole survivor, of not being victim 157, was suffocating her. "This is all my fault," she whispered to the empty room. It was then that Detective Spencer finally moved from his corner, crouching in front of her chair, his hands gripping the armrests to force her gaze to meet his. "Mrs. Wallace, you need to listen to me," he said, his voice solid as granite. "This was not your fault. That aircraft suffered a catastrophic engine failure 6 minutes after takeoff. The NTSB is all over it," he pressed on. "But every piece of preliminary evidence points to mechanical failure. This was not an act of sabotage. Do you understand what I'm saying?" But her mind was caught in a horrifying loop. "If I had gotten on that flight," she countered, her logic twisted by trauma, 157 people would be dead. That's the only difference." His voice grew sharp then, not with anger, but with the cold edge of certainty. "Someone made damn sure you were supposed to be on that flight, Mrs. Wallace. And now," he said, the words landing like stones in the silent apartment, "we need to figure out who, and we need to figure out why. As if summoned by his words, the door to the safe house swung open. A man in his mid-40s entered, tall, dressed in a crisply tailored suit with a federal badge clipped to his belt. FBI, he stated, his voice instantly taking control of the space. Detective Spencer, I'm Special Agent Reed, Seattle Field Office. I'm up to speed. It was time to dissect the passenger list. Spencer stood, surrendering his chair to Agent Reed as another agent secured the door behind them, making the small apartment feel suddenly claustrophobic. Mrs. Wallace, Reed began, his posture that of an interrogator. I need to review some information that will be difficult to hear, and it is imperative that you remain focused. Can you do that for me? She told me later that all she could manage was a short, terrified nod. He laid the first bombshell without preamble. Pacific Airways had released a preliminary passenger manifest generated directly from their gateside system. Your name is on that list, he said, his tone devoid of emotion. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. I know, she began, but he simply held up a hand, silencing her. The airline's records show your boarding pass was scanned at gate C7 at 10:18 this morning, and we have airport security footage that corroborates it. That's impossible, she insisted. I was here. I was with Detective Spencer. Precisely, Reed replied. Special Agent Reed lifted a tablet and swiped the screen before turning it to face her. It was a still from the security cameras at Gate C7. The image showed a man, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap and sunglasses, his body cloaked in a nondescript jacket, approaching a self-scan boarding gate. He scanned a QR code from a mobile phone in his hand, and then, without a single hesitation, turned and melted back into the boarding scrum. The timestamp at the bottom of the image read 10:18:03 a.m. That's your husband, Nathan, Agent Reed stated, his voice flatly professional. He's wearing a cheap wig and drugstore glasses, but our facial recognition software confirmed the match. He used a screenshot of the mobile boarding pass that the airline emailed to you yesterday. In the middle of the boarding chaos, nobody looked twice. But why? Why would he go through all that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was Detective Spencer who answered, slotting the final grotesque piece of the puzzle into place. Because he needed your name on that manifest, Ashley. When an insurance company investigates a claim related to a plane crash, the very first document they verify is that passenger list. If your name isn't on it, the policy doesn't pay out. Agent Reed gave a slow, somber nod. Immediately following the incident, Pacific Airways transmitted that manifest to the FAA to begin the process of notifying next of kin. That list, he explained, is based entirely on whose boarding pass gets scanned, not on a physical head count, which means your name is on it. Officially, as far as the world is concerned, you were on that flight. The room began to swim around her, and she gripped the table to steady herself. Mrs. Wallace, Reed pressed on, I have already been in contact with Pacific Airways. We have requested that they delay issuing a correction to that manifest for the next 48 to 72 hours. This changes everything, the detective told her, his voice low and serious. We're no longer investigating just a plane crash. This is a complex conspiracy involving massive insurance fraud and attempted murder. The protocols for a case this significant allow us to control the flow of information, and the airline is cooperating. Ashley's voice was a raw whisper. You're letting them lie. There are families. People think I'm dead. No, Agent Reed interjected, his tone softening unexpectedly. There are no families searching for you. Your husband, Nathan, is listed as your sole emergency contact. He's your next of kin, And at this moment, he is 100% convinced that you are gone. Detective Spencer swiped the tablet to a different video feed. This one was from the main airport terminal, showing Nathan standing beneath a massive news monitor. The timestamp read 10:51 a.m. I have seen the footage myself. I watched Nathan on that screen, his face a perfect sculpture of a frantic, worried husband. And then I saw the mask crack. He pulled out his phone, and I watched him scroll, undoubtedly checking the online passenger manifest, searching for her name. And then, for a single horrifying frame, that smile returned. It was a fleeting flash of pure, unadulterated relief. He walked out of that airport at 11:03 a.m. He thinks he got away with it, Ashley said, her own voice sounding foreign and distant. He thinks you're dead, Detective Miller stated, his voice flat. And we need to use that. Agent Spencer leaned in, his gaze intense. Kayla, the plan hinges on Nathan believing you died today. We're putting you somewhere safe, a place he couldn't find in a million years. And we'll have eyes on him 24/7. Men who think they've gotten away with it always get cocky. They slip up. And he will make a mistake. They walked her through the impossible plan. He's going to call the other woman, Miller said. He'll try to get into the money, and you can bet everything you have he'll file that insurance claim. The second he makes a move, we've got him. Kayla's voice was a raw whisper. How long? Spencer's answer was immediate. 72 hours, maybe less. Her gaze drifted to the tablet, to the still frame of Nathan smiling at her. The man who swore it was them against the world, right up until the very end. And the most twisted part? Nathan seemed to have taken that vow to its most literal conclusion. Agent Spencer pushed a business card across the table. There's one last thing. This news is about to break. Kayla, your name will be on the official list of the deceased. Your friends, your coworkers, when they see it, they will believe you are gone. We can't stop that from happening. And we can't correct the record, he continued, his voice heavy. Not for a while. She pictured everyone. Her best friend Ashley, the third grader she adored, all of them, about to be plunged into mourning for her. All she could force out was, I understand. Detective Miller rose and retrieved a small box from a drawer. Inside lay a burner phone, a single key, and a thick envelope of cash. That phone has one number in it, he explained. Mine. The key is to the safe house, he added. The cash is for anything you need. Do not touch your credit cards. Don't contact anyone. For the next 3 days, Kayla Bennett is a ghost. The strategy was terrifyingly simple. Just watch and wait for Nathan to reveal himself, believing he was now a widower. They hid her in a place with 3 deadbolts and a clear view of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. But she couldn't bear to look at the water. The only thing she could picture was twisted metal and recovery divers pulling bodies from the cold depths of the Puget Sound. The apartment was stark. 1 bedroom, a living room furnished with folding chairs and a card table. On that table sat 3 laptops, each screen split into 4 camera feeds. They provided her with 12 silent, black and white windows into her own home, the home where the man she loved was now performing the role of the grieving husband. Detective Miller was a constant, quiet presence, nursing a cup of terrible gas station coffee. He hadn't left her side in the 4 hours since they brought her there, a steady anchor as her universe imploded. Cameras were active at 2 p.m., he informed her. The judge signed off at 11:15. Tying it to the crash and attempted murder charge bought us a lot of latitude. We have eyes on the living room, kitchen, garage, and the front door. The warrant for audio was still tangled in bureaucratic knots, so for now, all they could do was watch. Then, at 2:34 that afternoon, Nathan's Lexus appeared in the driveway on one of the feeds. Kayla watched him exit the car, step inside, and toss his keys onto the console table. And then he just stopped. He stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his eyes scanning the living room as if it were a foreign country. He finally sagged onto their sofa, took out his phone, and just stared at the screen, not moving for 5 solid minutes. And then he smiled. It wasn't a broad, obvious grin. It was a small, secret, and profoundly satisfied smirk. It was on his face for maybe 3 seconds, but it was as clear as a confession. "Did you see that?" she breathed, her voice trembling. Miller offered a single sharp nod, his jaw tight. Nathan then rose, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. He twisted the cap off and took a long, slow swallow. He set the bottle on the counter and just stood there, taking these deep, shuddering breaths, like a man who had just been relieved of an immense burden. Later that evening, at 6:48, her best friend, Ashley, arrived. On the front door camera, Kayla watched Ashley's beat-up Subaru pull in, a faded sticker on its bumper. She saw her friend exit the car, clutching her purse as she approached the door and rang the bell. The moment Nathan opened it, Ashley's face crumpled, and she collapsed into terrible, soul-shattering sobs. He drew her into an embrace. Kayla was forced to watch her best friend weep on her husband's shoulder as he patted her back, his chin resting on her hair. And over Ashley's head, his expression was utterly blank, calm, dry-eyed, his gaze sweeping the room as if taking inventory of his new life. "She has no clue," Kayla choked out. "She really thinks I'm gone." "I'm sorry," was all Miller could offer. "This is how it has to be. She's my best friend." On screen, Ashley was talking frantically through her tears, and Nathan just kept nodding. They moved to the couch where Ashley produced a casserole dish from her bag. Of course she did. That was Ashley's way. When there was pain, you brought food. Nathan offered her a smile so warm, so seemingly full of authentic gratitude, it would have convinced anyone. For Kayla, observing from miles away, the performance made her stomach churn. For 2 excruciating hours, she sat through the charade. She watched her best friend grieve while her husband, Nathan, played the part of the perfect supportive widower, his arm draped around her, offering tissues. At 8:52, Ashley finally departed. The instant the door clicked shut, Nathan's entire face went slack. He leaned back, pulled out his phone, and that same secret, smug smile crept back onto his lips. Beside her, Detective Miller quietly added another note to his file. He was a monster, but an incredibly convincing one. Sleep was impossible for Kayla that first night. She remained in that folding chair, a ghost haunting the monitors, her eyes raw and burning. At 11:14 p.m., the living room lights went out. 8 minutes later, at 11:22, the bedroom plunged into darkness. Through the eerie green filter of the night vision camera, she watched him, searching for any sign of grief. A restless turn, a glance at her empty side of the bed, anything that might suggest he felt her absence. But he offered nothing, not a single thing. The footage showed Nathan falling asleep within minutes. His breathing was deep and even, the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. It was the untroubled sleep of a man with no conscience at all. When Detective Miller returned at 6 in the morning carrying a McDonald's bag, Kayla was in the exact same chair. "You have to get some rest," he said gently. Her reply was flat and hollow. I can't. He knew better than to push. He simply left the food on the table and resumed his silent vigil with her. Then, at 9:12 on the morning of September 13th, the case broke wide open. Nathan walked into the garage. A camera hidden near the door captured everything. He stood dead center in the frame, pulled out his phone, and placed a call. The audio was still inactive, so they couldn't hear a word, but his body language screamed his guilt. He was practically buzzing with energy, a massive grin splitting his face. He gestured with his free hand, pumping a fist in the air with an excitement she'd only seen when he landed a major account at work. He paced back and forth, nodding emphatically, and then he let out a laugh, a deep, booming laugh of pure, unfiltered joy. After hanging up, he stared at his phone, then threw his fist into the air in a triumphant pose. Detective Miller leaned toward the screen. My God, he murmured. What in the world was that? Miller was already on his own phone, his expression hard. Requesting his phone records right now. We'll know who he was talking to by the end of the day. Kayla could only stand there, frozen, as Nathan, looking utterly relieved and practically glowing, strolled back into the house they had built together. He's not grieving, Miller said, his voice a low growl. He's celebrating. That night, at 11:47 p.m., a silver Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. A woman emerged, but from their vantage point, Kayla couldn't make out her face. The camera's resolution was too grainy. All they could discern was a slender build and a cascade of long, dark hair. The woman walked straight to the front door, didn't bother to knock, and used a key to let herself inside as if she owned the place. And Nathan was there waiting for her. He pulled her into a long, possessive hug that seemed to stretch on forever. Then they walked upstairs together, and moments later, the light in their bedroom switched on. 10 minutes after that, it went dark. Miller immediately ran the license plate. The vehicle was registered to a 29-year-old woman named Heather Morgan with an address in Bellevue. He turned to Kayla and asked if the name meant anything to her. She just shook her head, her expression completely vacant. In all the years she had been with Nathan, she had never heard him utter that name. Heather didn't depart until 6 the next morning. The audio surveillance they had been waiting for was finally approved, going live at 4:17 p.m. on September 13th. Kayla later said she wished it never had. Detective Miller was standing by the window when he got the notification on his phone. Detective Spencer Reed adjusted the volume on the laptop, his eyes fixed on Kayla. The judge signed off on the audio warrant, he said, his voice a low hum in the sterile quiet of the safe house. We are live. He tapped a key, and a tiny green eye blinked to life on the screen, a digital peephole into the heart of her life, or what was left of it. Through the speakers, the ambient silence of her own living room filled the air. We're going to hear everything now, Spencer murmured, his tone softer than she'd ever heard from a man of the law. Are you ready? She was the opposite of ready. She was a hollowed-out version of herself, but she managed a small, trembling nod. The operation had begun when a federal agent named Peterson collected her from the wreckage of her old life at 7 that morning. This is how a life implodes. It began on September 14th, when Detective Nathan Miller entered the room, looking as though he'd lived 1,000 years in a single night. He let a thick manila folder fall onto the table in front of Kayla, the sound echoing the finality of a closing door. Phone records, he grunted, his voice raw with exhaustion. Derek's cell. Verizon dropped the whole file on us at 3 a.m. He flipped it open, revealing a dense forest of data. Calls logged, texts time-stamped, a grotesque blueprint for a man living two lives at once. Kayla's gaze immediately found Derek's name, a familiar anchor in a sea of alien numbers. But it was the other number, the one that appeared next to his name over and over, that sent a shock of ice through her veins. That number, Miller said, pointing a worn finger at the column, is registered to an Ashley Morgan, 29 years old, works as a pharmaceutical rep out of Bellevue, drives a 2019 Honda. Her record is spotless. How long? The question escaped Kayla's lips as a broken whisper. 14 months, Miller answered, his gaze unwavering. First contact was a text on January 18th, 2022. Since then, we've counted 1,347 text messages, 206 phone calls. The average call length was 23 minutes. 14 months. The number hung in the air, a monument to deceit. It meant that while Kayla was mourning the loss of her parents, while she was shaping the minds of her second-grade students, while she was sleeping beside the man she believed was her partner in everything, he was meticulously constructing another world with someone else. We subpoenaed her employment records, Miller pressed on, his professional tone barely masking a current of sympathy. She travels for work, and the company car is equipped with GPS. We have the logs. He slid a printout across the table. It places her vehicle in your neighborhood, on your street, 83 separate times in the last year, almost always midday when you were at school. He paused, letting the information land, and his expression softened. Mrs. Connor, Kayla, she corrected him, her voice a faint echo of what it once was. Her mind was a dizzying kaleidoscope of numbers. 1,347, 83, 14. Does she know? She asked, the words so quiet they were nearly lost. About the insurance policy? About what he was planning to do? We don't know for sure, Miller admitted. But we're about to find out. And later that night, at 11:52 p.m., Ashley Morgan walked through the front door of Kayla's home. And for the first time, Kayla heard the voice of the woman who had replaced her. Oh my God, a voice choked with sobs crackled through the hidden microphone. Oh my God, Derek, I saw it on the news. I saw her name on the flight manifest. I can't process this. Then came the voice of her husband, Derek, low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. Hey, it's okay. Kayla's stomach turned. It was the same soothing tone he used on her when she was upset. It was a poison she had mistaken for medicine. Come here. The agents listening heard only the shuffle of feet, the dip of couch cushions, the whisper of fabric. I'm so sorry. Ashley wept. I know things were rocky between you two, but she was still your wife. This has to be just... But Derek didn't let her finish. His voice sliced through her words, devoid of grief. Listen to me, he said. It's done. She's gone. We don't have to hide anymore. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room where Kayla sat, listening to her own eulogy. Then, Ashley's voice returned, small and uncertain. What are you talking about? I mean, we're free, he clarified. You and me, the hiding is over. No more lies. We can finally be together, for real. But, Derek, all of those people? Wrong place, wrong time, Derek said, his voice so empty of emotion it was monstrous. He spoke of the deaths of 156 souls with the same casual indifference as someone discussing a traffic jam. You could say fate did us a favor, In that instant, all the air left Kayla's lungs. Across the table, Detective Thompson sat perfectly still, a coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. Miller was already holding his phone up to the laptop speaker, creating a backup recording of the chilling audio. Fate? Ashley's voice was strained. Derek, that's. You can't say that. Why not? It's the truth. I've been agonizing for months over how to leave her, and now I don't have to. The universe took care of it for me. That is a monstrous thing to say, she whispered, horror lacing her words. It's an honest thing, he countered. A long, tense silence stretched between them. And don't you dare sit there and pretend there isn't a small part of you that's relieved. Another pause, longer this time, thick with unspoken thoughts. I am, she finally admitted, her voice dropping to a near inaudible confession. God, I'm so sorry, but I am. I am so tired of sneaking around. I know, baby, he soothed, but it's over now. There's something else, Ashley said, a new note of fear in her voice. Something we need to talk about. What is it? The baby, she said. You promised we would tell her together. You said we would sit Kayla down, explain everything, figure out the custody arrangement. And now, we don't have to explain a damn thing to anyone. Derek's voice was suddenly electric, buzzing with a sick, triumphant energy. You're 5 months along. We can just tell people we got together after she died. It's a perfect story. They'll all understand. Grief, loneliness, finding comfort with an old friend. No one will ever second guess it. 5 months? Kayla pressed her hand hard against her mouth, stifling a scream that clawed at her throat. Are you sure? Ashley asked, her voice laced with doubt. People can count. If the baby is born in February is 6 months from now, he interrupted. By then, we'll be long gone from this place. Gone where? The Cayman Islands. I told you, Ashley, we're not staying here. There are too many bad memories, too much media attention. We're getting a fresh start, somewhere warm. Just you, me, and our little one. But Derek, how can we possibly afford that? And at this, her husband, the man she once knew, let out a loud, genuine laugh that chilled her to the bone. Kayla had a life insurance policy, $2 million, and I am the sole beneficiary. It'll take a few weeks to process, but once that check clears, we are set for life. $2 million. Oh my God, Derek. I know, he said, his voice trembling with unconcealed excitement. It changes everything for us. On the recording, they could hear footsteps, the soft hum and click of a refrigerator door, and the unmistakable clink of glass. What are you doing? Ashley asked. I'm opening a bottle of champagne. We have to celebrate. Derek, I can't drink. I'm pregnant. Then I'll drink enough for both of us, he declared. A cork popped, a startlingly loud sound, followed by the fizz of a carbonated pour. To us, Ashley, Derek toasted, to our new beginning, to never hiding again. To us, she repeated, but her voice was a fragile whisper. Her words were so faint, so hollow, they seemed to carry all the doubt in the world. Miller and Thompson were now hunched over the laptop, their faces illuminated by the screen's glow. By this time next month, Derek continued, his voice full of grand plans, we will be on a beach in the Caymans. $2 million buys a lot of forgetting, Ash. It's going to buy us an entirely new life. I love you, Ashley whispered. I love you too, he answered. Both of you. There was a brief silence. When he spoke again, his voice was low and intimate. Let me see. Come on, Let me see your belly. They heard the rustle of clothing, a soft, hesitant laugh from her. And then Derek's voice, so saturated with what sounded like profound love that it was the purest form of evil. "Hey there, little one," he cooed. "Daddy can't wait to meet you." Kayla barely made it to the adjoining bathroom before she was violently ill. For Kayla Connor, the end of the world wasn't a plane crash. It was the cold, unforgiving tile of a government safe house bathroom floor. She told me later that she just knelt there, sobbing uncontrollably as his words echoed in the chambers of her mind. "Daddy can't wait to meet you." He was speaking to a child conceived in betrayal, a child that was part of a plan to fund a new life on the ashes of her own. And for me, listening to her recount this story, I knew I hadn't just lost a friend that day. I had lost a brother. Kayla recounted how, after she had completely fallen apart, Agent Spencer Reed simply sat on the floor a few feet away, holding a glass of water. He apologized in a low voice for what she'd been forced to endure. Her hand shook as she took the glass. "5 months," she managed to say. "She is 5 months pregnant." Reed's expression was grim as he confirmed it, explaining that Derek's horrifying plan had been set in motion long before he ever purchased her life insurance policy. "He was already with her," she whispered, the monstrous reality of it all crashing down on her once more. Reed could only nod in agreement. I can only imagine the utter desolation in her eyes as she asked him how any human being could survive this kind of betrayal. There was nothing to do but return to that room, to her front row seat at the celebration of her own murder, hosted by her husband and his pregnant mistress. In the other room, the agents were already replaying the tape. They were rewinding the recording, transcribing every damning word. Reed explained to Kayla that what they had was a direct confession to insurance fraud. Derek was the beneficiary of a $2 million policy he intended to use to flee the country. That was conspiracy, at the very least. But Reed cautioned that they still needed to prove Derek knew the specifics of that policy before the plane went down. "His defense will claim he's just a grieving opportunist," the other agent Thompson added. "They'll argue the crash was a tragic coincidence, and he only decided to run afterward." Reed turned his attention back to Kayla, his voice gentle but firm. "Can you think of anything, a document, an email, a conversation, that can prove Derek was looking at that policy before September 12th? And in that moment, a crystal clear image flashed in her mind. Derek at his laptop in their home office, the screen angled away, and the single word beneficiary visible just before he slammed the lid shut. "Yes," she told them. The moment the world believed Kayla Connor was dead, a different kind of clock started ticking. On day 4 of her new, hidden life, Derek filed the $2 million insurance claim. By day 5, he had already spent every last cent of it in his mind, mapping out a future paved with her memory. And Kayla watched it all from the suffocating confines of a safe house, her eyes glued to a monitor as Derek strode into his lawyer's office at 10:23 a.m., dressed in the same sharp charcoal suit he had worn to her father's funeral. In the hushed quiet of a federal observation room, the surveillance feed showed Derek beside a stone-faced lawyer, Mr. Harrison, scrawling his signature across a mountain of paperwork for a full 47 minutes. Then, at 10:31 a.m. sharp, a chime broke the silence. An agent's laptop screen flashed. A life insurance claim for Kayla had just been processed. The beneficiary was her husband, Derek. The policy was worth $2 million. Agent Reed, speaking softly to Kayla as she watched the scene unfold from her own safe house, noted that a standard claim could take up to 60 days. For a plane crash victim, however, a death certificate could be fast-tracked in just 2 weeks. This meant Derek expected his windfall by the beginning of October. October 3rd, Kayla breathed, the words catching in her throat. That was their wedding anniversary. Opposite Derek, Mr. Harrison's stoic silence seemed to amplify the room's morbid purpose. Later that afternoon, surveillance audio captured Derek in his own kitchen, his gaze drifting over the garden Kayla had planted back in June. "Hey, Chloe," he began, his tone a careful mix of sorrow and fatigue. "Yeah, I'm I'm getting by. Look," he continued, his voice an absolute masterclass in fabricated grief. "I'm arranging a small memorial, Sunday the 24th. Just close friends. I can't—" He produced a choked, theatrical swallow. "I can't bring myself to plan a funeral. Not when we don't have her body." The entire conversation was a calculated performance. Chloe, predictably, was completely taken in. "Oh, Derek, of course. Anything you need? Do you want my help?" "No, no," he rushed to say. I need the people who truly loved her there." With that, he had ensnared her. Chloe promised to attend and to contact their mutual friends. "Thank you," Derek murmured, his voice cracking with perfect, rehearsed timing. "I have no idea how I'm supposed to do this," he confided in her. "How can you even say goodbye when you never had the chance?" Kayla listened, horrified, as Chloe began to weep on the other end of the line. And Derek, her Derek, standing in their shared kitchen, turned his back to the hidden camera and allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. On a legal pad, Mr. Harrison simply wrote, "Memorial, September 24th, a public display of grief. On the 15th of September at 3:42 in the afternoon, Derek walked into a local bank and withdrew $8,000 in cash. The ATM's footage was low resolution, but the FBI had a clear image within the hour. It was him, his expression placid, betraying none of the Emmy-worthy anguish he had displayed just one day prior." Agent Reed laid out the transaction records for Kayla. "It's their joint savings," he said, indicating the balance of roughly $127,000. "He can access all of it." Mr. Harrison questioned the method. "Why use an ATM for that amount?" Reed tapped the screen. "He didn't. This withdrawal was made with a different card. It was your personal Visa, Kayla." Kayla could only stare at the screen. "But I don't have my Visa card," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was in my handbag when I left for the trip." Mr. Harrison's conclusion was grim and immediate. "He must have taken it before you left." Agent Reed affirmed it. The bank's automated fraud system flagged it instantly. The primary cardholder was reported as deceased on September 13th. "That sent an alert straight to our task force," Reed went on. "We now have him on camera, clear as day, using a credit card belonging to a woman the world believes is dead." Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair. "He's becoming reckless." "He's becoming desperate," Agent Reed countered. The very next day, audio bugs picked up Derek pacing his garage, a known blind spot for the cameras, while on the phone with his brokerage. You could almost hear the strained patience in his voice. "I understand that, but I am her husband. I am the executor of her estate. I require access to her investment portfolio." A pause followed as he listened. 240,000. Yes, I'm aware of the current balance." Another silence, thick with tension. "What do you mean you require a death certificate? The crash was all over the national news." The firm's response was inaudible, but Derek's reaction spoke volumes. How long does that take? Several weeks? I don't have several weeks. I have creditors breathing down my neck. He quickly corrected himself, shifting back into the role of the bereaved. I'm sorry. This has all been incredibly difficult. Could you just walk me through the necessary steps? It was nauseating to hear him pivot so seamlessly. Then, Derek's voice hardened into a low snarl. Fine, I'll get your damn certificate. He ended the call, the sound of his fist hitting a workbench echoing in the small space. Mr. Harrison jotted down another note. Death certificate needed. Asset liquidation is stalled. By 9:47 that evening, Derek was in the kitchen again, this time with the other woman, Megan. I went ahead and booked the tickets, he told her, the smile audible in his voice. Grand Cayman, September 25th. They are one way. One way? Megan's voice was laced with panic. Derek, that is only 9 days from now. I'm aware, he said calmly, but we need to move. I want us far away before that insurance money comes through. The scrutiny will be too intense. But what about the baby? My prenatal appointment is on the 27th. We will find the best obstetrician in Grand Cayman, he assured her, his voice like silk. Money will no longer be an object for us, Megan. You just have to trust me. There was a brief hesitation before she whispered, I do trust you. It's just happening. So fast. I know, my love, he soothed. 1 month from today, we will be on a beach, and we'll never have to hide again. No more constantly looking over our shoulders. It will just be the two of us and our new baby. As he spoke these words, Agent Reed was already confirming the flight details. 2 first-class tickets to the Cayman Islands, departing at 6 a.m. on September 25th. The return date field was empty. He's making a run for it, Mr. Harrison stated plainly. He believes he's making a run for it, Agent Reed corrected him. He angled his laptop toward Kayla, showing her the time-stamped, high-contrast image from the ATM, Derek's face, clear and untroubled, as he pocketed the $8,000. He's funding his escape with his new life, with her using your money, the agent said. Kayla could do nothing but stare at the face of the man she had promised her life to. The man who was systematically draining their shared life to finance a new one with another woman, while she was forced to watch, a ghost in her own existence. How much longer? She asked, her voice thin and frayed. How much longer do I have to stay dead? Mr. Harrison and Agent Reed exchanged a somber look before the lawyer opened a new digital file. We discovered a payment from Derek's business account. Mr. Harrison began, his tone heavy with implication. $15,000, wired on August 28th to an individual named Austin. He is a professional problem solver based out of Las Vegas. We took him into custody early this morning. Kayla later said a deep, paralyzing cold washed over her. A fixer. The kind of man you call when you need a problem to permanently disappear. Mrs. Miller, Agent Reed said gently, your husband didn't just want you out of the picture. He paid a professional to ensure you were erased from it. On the 6th day of her sequestered new life, federal agents arrested the man Derek hired to murder her. And on the 7th day, she sat in a sterile room and listened as that man described, in chillingly methodical detail, exactly how she was supposed to have died. They eventually showed me the mugshot. Austin, he's 41, the agent had explained to her. Dishonorable military discharge in 2009. He's been arrested 7 times in the last 10 years. Assault, wire fraud, you name it. But he never serves a full sentence. Key witnesses develop amnesia. He was the type of person you hired in Vegas when you needed a situation handled with absolute finality. He was the kind of man who made problems vanish. I remember seeing the photo myself, the shaved head, the completely vacant eyes, and a pale scar that sliced through his left eyebrow. He was exactly the monster you'd imagine. We arrested him at a rundown motel this morning, the federal agent told Kayla. That $15,000 wire transfer? It went directly into a shell corporation registered to Austin. We have all the bank records, he continued, and we also have the contract. That one word seemed to suck all the air out of the room. A contract? Kayla echoed. Encrypted email correspondence, the agent confirmed. But our cyber division cracked it. Your husband was incredibly specific. Austin quoted him a price, 15 grand up front, with 85,000 to be paid upon completion. $100,000. That was the price Derek put on your life. Then Agent Harris turned his tablet, revealing a live video feed from an FBI interrogation suite. It looked exactly like a scene from a movie. Stark gray walls, a single steel table, 2 chairs. Austin sat there, one wrist cuffed to the table. Facing him was Harris's partner, a calm but imposing Special Agent Miller. A nervous-looking lawyer in an ill-fitting suit sat beside Austin, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. This is happening live, Agent Harris told Kayla. You are watching this in real time. Are you ready? She managed a small nod, but later confessed she was completely unraveling inside. For the first hour, Austin gave them nothing, weaving a flimsy story about a business loan and claiming he'd never even heard the name Derek Miller. Austin blustered on, insisting the emails had to be forgeries. That's when Agent Miller calmly slid a single sheet of paper across the cold metal table. These are your cell phone records. On September 12th at 3:17 p.m., you accepted a call from a number registered to Derek Miller. The call lasted 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Why don't you tell us what you two discussed? Austin stared at the paper, the color draining from his face as his facade crumbled. We can make a deal, Miller offered. A conspiracy charge will get you 10 years. You'll likely serve 7. Or we can charge you with conspiracy to commit murder, and you will face 25 to life. The choice is yours. I was told Austin glanced at his lawyer, who offered a barely perceptible nod. Austin sagged back in his chair, defeated. What do you want to know? He finally asked. I first met Derek on August 20th at some seedy bar off the Vegas Strip. His voice, they said, was completely devoid of emotion, as if he were reciting a grocery list. He told me he had a problem he couldn't solve, a wife who refused to just walk away. He wanted it to look like a random, tragic accident. I told him accidents of that nature are expensive. He paused for a moment. He said cost was not a concern. The plan was simple. He was flying her out to Vegas from September 12th to the 15th with a reservation at Caesar's Palace. The scheme he had devised was terrifyingly simple. Derek had paid a man named Austin to approach his wife, Kayla, at the hotel pool on the 13th. Amid the noise and chaos, it would have been the ideal distraction. The weapon of choice? GHB. A few drops into her margarita, and Kayla would have chalked up the sudden dizziness to the hot desert sun. Austin's role was to then play the part of a concerned Good Samaritan, offering to help her back to the safety of her room. The deception was designed to look like a tourist who'd had too much to drink. From the hotel security camera's perspective, he was just a Good Samaritan helping an intoxicated woman to her room. But inside, the facade would crumble into a chillingly simple plot. He'd draw a bath, wait for her to lose consciousness, and hold her head beneath the water. The coroner would call it an accidental drowning, a tragic footnote to a vacation gone wrong. For the local police, it would be another closed case by week's end. And with that, Derek Bennett would collect on a life insurance policy of staggering value, while a hired killer named Austin would be $85,000 richer. But that's not how it played out, according to Agent Miller. The entire scheme imploded, undone by Derek's own hand. On September 12th, at approximately 3:17 p.m. Pacific Time, Derek made a call. The transcript captures him telling Austin, "Call it off. She's already gone. Plane crash. Fate handled it for you," Derek reportedly said, followed by a laugh. It wasn't the sound of humor. It was the noise of profound, chilling relief, a man feeling a crushing weight suddenly vanish. Agent Miller played that very recording for Kayla. Even through the phone's tiny speaker, Derek's voice was sharp, punctuated by that quick, almost joyful chuckle. That sound would ultimately seal his fate. When questioned by Agent Miller about the rest of the conversation, Austin recounted a scene of sickening normalcy. The hired gun had asked about the $15,000 deposit. Derek told him to keep it as a kind of bonus, calling the plane crash his lucky break just before ending the call. That single, shockingly casual exchange became the linchpin for the federal case. Miller then explained to Kayla just how deeply entangled Austin had become. The case against my friend Derek was as brutal as it was undeniable. They had him on a contract, killing targeting his own wife, Kayla. They had the wire transfer for $15,000. They had copies of her flight information and hotel reservations. And when he mistakenly believed she had perished in a national tragedy, he called off the hit, celebrating that destiny had done his dirty work. Austin corroborated every last damning piece of it, with a signed statement from the hitman, who was now the prosecution's key witness. The investigation had Derek cornered. Agent Miller then faced Kayla, who had just been forced to listen to this waking nightmare. "We've got him for attempted murder, conspiracy, and wire fraud," he stated. "He's facing a very long time. But before that, he has to see you." The trap was being laid. It was time for his ghost to walk back into his life. At that moment, Detective Hayes, the local investigator assigned to the case, stepped forward. He offered her a keychain holding her house key, a small brass key adorned with a flower charm she'd found at a local market. "Tomorrow," Hayes stated, his tone firm. "2:30 in the afternoon. We'll use the front door. It will be myself, my partner, 4 federal agents, and you. We've confirmed Derek's schedule. He will be home. Jenna will be there as well," Hayes continued, referring to Derek's pregnant girlfriend. "We're taking them both into custody." As it turned out, Jenna was facing charges as an accessory. She was aware of the insurance fraud and the escape plan, fully complicit in the entire grotesque deception. Kayla simply stared at the key, the very one that opened the door to a life her husband had tried to violently extinguish only 7 days before. "Are you prepared for this?" Detective Hayes asked her. "I can't fathom how anyone could be. How does one brace for the moment they confront the man who cheered for their death?" Yet, she accepted the key. She agreed. What followed was a confrontation so raw, so unbelievable that no one could have predicted the outcome when a man was forced to reckon with the life he was certain he'd already buried. The house itself, I was told, projected an almost painful sense of normalcy from the curb. The front door, painted a cheerful shade of blue by Kayla on a warm Saturday 2 summers prior, was a picture of domestic bliss. It was a perfect suburban mask, concealing the monster that lived within. The man inside was absolutely convinced that the woman who had made that house a home was dead. At 2:31 in the afternoon, Detective Hayes stood with her on the driveway, his hand a steadying presence on her back. An FBI tactical team was already in position, covering every possible exit, ensuring there would be no escape. The final act of Derek Bennett's dark fantasy was about to unfold. Detective Hayes strode to the blue door and knocked 3 times, the sound sharp and authoritative. His voice cut through the quiet afternoon. "Derek, Detective Hayes, Seattle Police, open the door." From within the house, there was only profound silence. He knocked again, with more force. "Mr. Bennett, we have a warrant. Either you open this door, or we will." Still, nothing. He then turned his gaze to Kayla. She placed the key in his hand, the one with the little flowered charm she had carried for 6 years. It was a simple piece of metal that unlocked a life now defined as a crime scene. He inserted it into the lock, turned his wrist, and the door swung inward. They were inside. The first thing Kayla recalled was the scent, a mixture of coffee and Jenna's perfume, a fragrance later described to me as cloyingly sweet. The living room was dim, every curtain drawn against the afternoon light. There on the sofa, illuminated by the cold glow of an iPad, sat Derek and Jenna, so lost in their world they hadn't heard a thing. Derek later told me he was showing Jenna the tickets at that exact moment. His finger was tracing a flight path on the screen, a one-way trip to the Cayman Islands scheduled for September 25th. It was their getaway. Jenna's head rested on his shoulder, her hand on the slight curve of her pregnant stomach. They were so close to being free. And then he heard his name. "Derek." Just that. He said the sound of Kayla's voice turned his blood to ice. The iPad slipped from his grasp, the screen shattering on the floor. He could only stare, frozen in place, the color draining from his face as he looked upon the impossible. Jenna looked up next, letting out a terrible, choked scream and scrambling away from him, as if he were contaminated. Derek stumbled to his feet, using the sofa for support. All he could manage was a whispered, "No." His voice was hollow. You're not supposed to be here." She moved a step forward, and he noticed Agent Miller's hand resting on her shoulder. "I'm aware," she said, her voice like steel. "That was your whole plan, right?" Derek told me his thoughts were a frantic blur, desperately trying to reconcile reality. "You were on that flight." I checked the passenger list myself. "I never boarded the plane, Derek," she informed him. And with those words, his entire world collapsed. I was at the airport terminal, giving a sworn statement about the $2 million life insurance policy you forged my signature on. He just stood there, shaking his head in denial. "I can explain," he stammered. "Explain what? Hiring someone to drug and drown me?" He never had a chance to formulate a response. "Explain making a call and laughing when you believed a plane crash had killed me? Celebrating my death with her while planning to run away with my money?" He said. She shot a look at Jenna, who was now just a heap on the floor, staring at Kayla as if she'd seen an apparition. He told me he made a move then, not toward her, but just an instinctual broken lunge. Agent Miller intercepted him instantly. "Don't even think about it," was all the agent said. Derek turned back to Kayla, his voice pleading. "None of this is what it looks like. This was for us." But she silenced him. This was for $2 million. In a final, desperate act, He made a break for the back door. He didn't make it 2 steps. A pair of FBI agents were already inside, weapons drawn. "On the floor now," one shouted. It was finished. As an agent secured his hands behind his back, Derek said the sharp click of the handcuffs was deafening in the silence. "Derek Bennett," the agent stated, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." As they recited his rights, his eyes remained locked on Kayla. His meticulously planned future had been completely annihilated in less than a minute. He said he couldn't even process the words being spoken. When they asked if he understood his rights, he could only whisper, "Yes." They began to guide him toward the front door, but he resisted, trying for one final appeal. He pleaded with her, "Kayla, please, I never wanted." Her gaze met his, and her voice was a blade. "You wanted me dead," she stated. "You paid a man to make sure of it. And when that fell through, you toasted to a national tragedy. Don't you dare try to tell me what you wanted, Derek. I know precisely what you wanted." They pulled him from the house then, pushing him into a waiting car. I later learned they arrested his girlfriend, Jenna, too, even as she sobbed that she was ignorant of the whole affair. And then Kayla was standing alone in the house he had built for their life together. Every photograph on the wall, every piece of furniture, was now evidence in a crime scene that marked his ultimate betrayal. He told me he watched her from the rear of the squad car, his gaze fixed on her through the back window. He just kept staring, trying to understand how the woman he had meticulously plotted to erase from existence was still standing. I was told she watched the car until it was out of sight. Agent Miller approached her and said quietly, "It's over now." But for Kayla, it was far from over. It was the start of a life haunted by the 7 days the world and her husband believed she was gone. Derek remained silent until his attorney arrived. His silence didn't matter. The prosecution had the hitman's full confession and a mountain of forensic evidence. But the following morning, from a sterile interrogation room, Derek Blake uttered 5 words that changed everything for me. "I'm ready to make a deal." I received a call, and within an hour, I was observing my oldest friend through a one-way mirror. Through the sterile two-way mirror, Derek Blake looked impossibly small. It was just past 10 a.m. on September 20th, and the stale, burnt coffee I'd been nursing for hours did little to cut through my exhaustion. Beside me, Detective Miller stood stone-faced, his arms crossed. On the other side of the glass, Agent Reed faced Derek across a cold metal table, while Derek's lawyer, Jessica Price, sat squarely between them, a human buffer. "My client is prepared to confess," Price announced, her voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the gravity of the room. "In exchange for a lesser charge, attempted murder in the second degree, with a sentence of 15 years. The prosecutor's response crackled through the intercom, sharp and unyielding. "First-degree attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. There will be no deal. He needs to talk. We can discuss his cooperation when we get to sentencing," the voice added with finality. I watched Price lean toward Derek, her words a hushed murmur against his ear. He gave a barely perceptible nod, his entire body deflating as if his strings had been cut. "He will cooperate," she said. Agent Reed slid a thin manila folder across the table. "Start at the beginning," he instructed, his tone flat. "Tell me everything that happened in March." When Derek finally looked up, his voice was a hollowed-out echo of the man I once knew. "Everything fell apart in March of 2023? Reed scribbled a note. Be more specific. Derek's gaze drifted. I lost $280,000 in cryptocurrency. It was from Kayla's inheritance. Her parents had left her $3.8 million. I tried to invest it. And it vanished. Agent Reed's pen scratched against the paper. Then I had to borrow money from a man named Marco. $95,000. He told me I had until September 20th to get it back to him, or Derek's breath hitched, a tremor running through him. Or he would kill me. Reed didn't look up. So, your solution was to kill your wife instead. It wasn't a question. Derek physically recoiled. I figured I could pay Marco back and start over. My mind was a complete wreck. Reed's gaze was relentless. And when did you decide to purchase the life insurance policy? On March 15th. I spent days researching accidental death claims. I landed on Secure Life. They offered a $2 million policy. I downloaded the forms, used Photoshop to forge her signature, and submitted it. The policy became active on June 1st. And that's when you began to plan, Reed stated. Derek nodded weakly. A car accident seemed too unpredictable. A staged fall had the same issue. Drowning felt cleaner. We had a spot at Cannon Beach we always went to, but it was too isolated. It would look suspicious. Which is why you chose Las Vegas, Reed supplied. Vegas is chaos. Nobody would question an accident there. When did you bring Austin into this? August 20th. I found him on the dark web. We communicated through encrypted messaging. He wanted $15,000 up front and another $85,000 when it was done. I wired him the first payment on August 28th. Agent Reed leaned forward, his voice dropping. Walk me through the plan. Austin was supposed to find Kayla by the pool at Caesar's Palace on September 13th. He would slip something into her drink, then offer to help her back to her room. Once there, he'd stage it to look like she drowned in the bathtub. An accident. And you were comfortable with that? Derek's jaw clenched. I was out of options. You presented the Vegas trip as a surprise on September 10th? An anniversary gift, yes. She didn't suspect a thing. She always trusted me, he said, and for the first time, his voice fractured. Sometime that week, I took her credit card and locked it in my safe. I knew I was going to need the liquid cash. Reed's eyes narrowed. September 12th. Tell me about that day. Derek pressed his eyes shut. I drove her to the airport. I called Austin from the car to give him her arrival time. From the gate, I watched her clear security. I remember thinking so vividly that this was the last time I would ever see her alive. Then I turned and walked away. My phone rang around 3:17 that afternoon. It was Austin, confirming if the plan was still a go. I was just about to give him the green light when a news alert flashed on my screen. Flight 447 had gone down. There were no survivors. And what was your first feeling? Agent Reed asked. Derek opened his eyes, locking them with the agent's. Relief. The word hung in the airless room, a confession more damning than any that had come before. Relief, Reed repeated, a note of disbelief coloring his tone. Yes. I called Austin right back. I told him it was off. That fate had handled his job for him. I didn't have to lift a finger. It felt like God had given me an out. From behind the glass, Kayla let out a choked sound, and Detective Miller gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Relief? Reed pushed. 156 people were on board that plane. The silence that followed was suffocating. When Derek finally spoke again, His voice was thin, almost translucent, because it meant I didn't have to be the one who killed her. I could tell myself it wasn't my fault. It was just a terrible, horrible accident. It wasn't my doing. But you had already set her murder in motion. You paid for it. I know. The agent laid out the facts, each one a hammer blow. You forged her name on an insurance policy, you wired thousands to a contract killer, and you spent 5 months meticulously planning to end your wife's life. And Derek, my childhood friend, could only whisper, I know. Reed leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. So, let me ask you, Mr. Blake, did you feel even an ounce of remorse when you heard that news, knowing all those other people were dead? Derek just stared down at his hands, clasped on the steel table. I felt relieved, he repeated, so quiet I could barely hear him. Does that make me a monster? The agent slammed the file shut, the sound cracking like a gunshot. Yes. On September 21st, 2023, the state threw the book at Derek Blake. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. Bail was denied. His trial was scheduled for March of 2024. I lingered in the observation room long after they cuffed Derek and led him away, my eyes fixed on the empty chair he'd left behind. An officer gently asked Kayla if she needed anything. She just shook her head, unable to form words. And who could blame her? The man she had built a life with had just as passionately recounted a 5-month plot to have her murdered. He had paid a total stranger to drug her, carry her to a hotel room, and hold her head underwater until she stopped breathing. And his immediate reaction to hearing her plane had crashed, a disaster that extinguished over 100 lives, was gratitude that someone else had done the dirty work for him. But later, I would learn that in that moment, Kayla felt a strange, mirrored version of that same emotion. Relief, because she was alive, because for all his meticulous planning, he had failed. And because in 6 months, it would be her turn to speak. The court gave her 6 months to learn how to exist in the world again. 6 months later, Kayla stepped into a packed courtroom and saw Derek in an orange jumpsuit. He looked gaunt, as if he'd shed 20 pounds of his former life. But she was the one who had lost everything: the husband she adored, the future they were supposed to have, and any remaining faith in her own judgment. It was Tuesday, March 4th, 2024. The air in the courtroom was thick with the smell of old paper and lemon-scented polish. Judge Thompson, a man who had seen the worst of humanity over 23 years on the bench, presided. The jury had been seated, 7 women and 5 men. Kayla's best friend Chloe sat directly behind her, a steadying hand resting on the back of her chair. From my seat in the press gallery, I watched Derek at the defense table. His lawyer, Samantha, radiated a sharp, predatory confidence, but Derek himself was a ghost. He fixated on the grain of the wooden table as if it held the secrets to his downfall, never once daring to look in Kayla's direction. I'd heard he hadn't looked at her since the day he learned she was, against all odds, alive. At 9 a.m., the sharp crack of the gavel silenced the room. The state of Washington versus Derek Blake. The prosecutor, Avery Collins, rose to her feet. She was 38, but carried herself with the authority of someone much older. A hush fell over the room as she made eye contact with the jury. "This case," she started, her voice ablaze, cutting through the silence, "is about the depths of greed hidden behind the mask of love." Derek Blake looked his wife, Kayla, in the eyes. Collins continued. He kissed her goodbye, and he sent her to an airport knowing full well that a man he had hired was waiting in Las Vegas to end her life. A plane goes down, 156 souls are lost, and Derek Blake does not mourn. He celebrates. "And you," she said, her eyes sweeping across the jury box, "are going to hear that celebration on a recording." The quiet in the room became heavy, suffocating. "You are going to hear testimony from the man Derek paid $15,000 to drown his wife in a bathtub," she promised. "You will see the $2 million life insurance policy he forged. You will see photographs of him kissing his pregnant mistress, Sarah, just hours after he believed Kayla was dead. And you will hear his own voice on a wiretap saying, 'Fate gave us a hand.'" Collins let the words hang in the air, holding Derek in her unwavering gaze for a long moment before she turned back to the jury. The defense will try to tell you that Derek Blake never actually harmed anyone. And, in a way, they are correct. He outsourced that job to a stranger. And when a national tragedy did his work for him, a tragedy he had no part in, he still moved to collect his prize. That, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is the definition of attempted first-degree murder. It is conspiracy, and it is fraud. She returned to her seat, the echo of her words filling the void. Derek's lawyer, Samantha, stood. Her approach was the complete opposite, composed and rational. "This is the story of a man who made a series of terrible, life-altering mistakes," she began. "But he is not a murderer. Derek Blake never once laid a hand on his wife. That plane crash was an unspeakable tragedy that my client had absolutely nothing to do with," she contended. "Merely thinking about doing something is not the same as the act itself. The law demands concrete proof, and you will not find it. He made plans that he ultimately abandoned. He hired a man whose services he never used. He was not on that flight." She gestured toward her client. "You will hear about his crushing debt, about his affair, about his desperation. You will hear about a man who hit rock bottom and made the worst choices a person can make. But what you will not hear is a single piece of evidence proving he killed anyone, because he did not." When she sat down, the room felt thick with doubt. On March 5th, the prosecution called its first witness, Austin Riggs. The man who took the stand, Austin Riggs, looked like he was pulled from central casting for a low-budget thriller. 41 years old, powerfully built, with a thin white scar tracing the line of his jaw. He told the court he'd been dishonorably discharged from the Marines back in 2009. In a flat, emotionless voice, he described meeting Derek in a grimy Las Vegas bar on August 20th, 2023. The agreement was simple: $100,000 to kill his wife, with a down payment of $15,000. Austin admitted it without a hint of remorse. He took the money. The plan, he testified, was chillingly straightforward. He was to drug Kayla's drink during a party at Caesar's Palace on September 13th. Then, under the guise of helping a drunk woman back to her room, he would drown her in the bathtub. But at 3:17 in the afternoon, the day before the plan was to be executed, Derek had called him. "The job is off," Derek had said. "She's already dead. The plane went down. Fate did the work for you." And Austin swore that when Derek said it, he was laughing. On March 6th, FBI agent David Miller began to lay the foundation of the case, stone by cold stone. The first piece of evidence was a life insurance application, bearing a signature that wasn't Kayla's, a clear forgery. The second was a terrifying crawlspace into Derek's mind. His search history, littered with queries like, "How long does GHB stay in your system?" and "accidental death insurance payout speed." Then came the exhibit that silenced the room: security footage from the night of the crash. The video showed Derek on a sofa, his mistress, Sarah, beside him. He leaned over and kissed her pregnant stomach. And then the audio clicked on. Derek's voice, a voice his friends and family knew, filled the courtroom. "Fate gave us a hand," he said. "She's gone. We're free." A woman on the jury next to me choked back a sob, her hand flying to her mouth. The prosecutor's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Agent Miller, did the defendant ever show remorse for the 156 people who died on Flight 447? Miller's response was chillingly devoid of emotion. "No, ma'am," he stated. He said he was relieved. Then, on March 8th, came the moment the entire trial had been building toward. The state calls Kayla Blake. As she made her way to the stand, her friend Chloe gave her hand a final supportive squeeze. When Kayla took the witness stand, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I watched her eyes lock onto Derek, but he refused to meet her gaze, staring down at the polished wood of the defense table, as if trying to disappear into it. This was the moment she had waited 6 agonizing months for. But when she opened her mouth, her voice fractured into silence. The judge, his voice gentle, asked if she needed a moment. She simply shook her head, a silent vow. She had come too far to turn back. Ms. Collins, the prosecutor, approached her. "Mrs. Blake, would you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?" Kayla drew a steadying breath. "I'm 31, she began, her voice gaining strength. "I'm a high school English teacher in Seattle. I have been married to Derek for 8 years. Our anniversary is October 3rd, 2015. "And do you have any children?" Collins inquired softly. "No." The word hung in the air. Broken. "We tried. I had 3 miscarriages." She recited the years as if they were inscriptions on tiny tombstones. 2017, 2019, and 2021. The last one, she added, happened just 6 weeks before a semi-truck on Highway 101 took both of her parents. She swallowed. Her composure a fragile thing. Her parents had left her an inheritance of $3.8 million, money that was deposited directly into a joint account in April of 2021. When Collins asked who managed their finances, her answer was quiet. "Derek did," Kayla said. "He was a financial advisor. I trusted him with everything." The prosecutor let that single word, trusted, reverberate in the stillness. "Mrs. Blake, were you ever made aware that your husband's financial advisor license had been revoked in August of 2022? The courtroom was utterly silent. Kayla's eyes finally drifted to Derek, who remained perfectly still. "No," she whispered. "I had no idea until Agent Miller showed me the paperwork 2 weeks ago." "Your Honor," Collins announced, turning to the judge, "I wish to enter into evidence Exhibit F, a revocation notice, citing excessive trading for the purpose of generating commissions." Samantha, Derek's counsel, shot to her feet with an objection, but the judge overruled her, stating it spoke directly to motive. I saw the bailiff hand Kayla the document, her hands trembling as she took it. "Did Derek ever inform you he had lost his license?" Collins asked. "No," Kayla replied. "He told me he quit his job to go into cryptocurrency full-time. He promised we were going to be incredibly rich." The prosecutor's follow-up was soft but sharp. "And were you?" "No," Kayla admitted, her voice shaking with the memory. By May of 2023, he had lost $280,000 of my inheritance. Collins gently walked her through the subsequent months. a timeline of escalating deceit. Had his behavior changed? Yes, Kayla affirmed. He started taking hushed phone calls in the garage, slamming his laptop shut whenever she entered his office. He began sleeping on the couch, blaming a sudden snoring problem she had never noticed before. This next part, recounted later by Derek's own lawyer, was shattering. The prosecutor asked Kayla if she'd ever attempted to review the investment documents. Twice, she said. Both times, Derek had brushed her off with a casual, "I've got it handled. Don't worry about it." She had desperately wanted to believe him. When the prosecutor asked her why she didn't push, Kayla looked directly at the jury, her voice raw with emotion. "Because I loved him. I'd already lost my parents and 3 babies," she explained to the court, her voice finally breaking under the weight of it all. "I couldn't bear the thought of losing my marriage, too." I saw Ms. Rossi, the lead prosecutor, offer her a tissue. Then she asked, her tone full of compassion, if Derek had simply requested the money, would she have given it to him? Kayla answered without a flicker of hesitation. "Yes," she said. "All of it. It was our money. I would have given him every last penny," she repeated, her gaze finally finding Derek, who sat there, impassive as a statue carved from stone. But he didn't want to ask. He just wanted me out of the picture. And with that gut-wrenching statement, the prosecution rested. Derek's lawyer, Mr. Evans, rose, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Blake," he began, his voice a low murmur of practiced sympathy, "I am profoundly sorry for your losses." Reading the transcripts later, I saw Mr. Evans began his cross-examination with a veneer of gentleness, telling Kayla he wanted to respect her grief while still asking necessary questions. Her reply was quiet but unshakable. "I understand." He immediately went for the heart of her testimony. "You stated you loved your husband. Did he love you?" A thick, heavy silence descended before she answered. "I thought he did." Evans seized the opening, but "you cannot be certain." That's when her voice transformed, becoming as sharp as ice. "I'm certain he hired a man to kill me. I'm certain he celebrated when he believed I was dead." Mr. Evans was on his feet, objecting before she finished the sentence. The judge sustained the objection, instructing Kayla to answer only the question asked. So, Mr. Evans changed his angle. "Isn't it true that you and Derek discussed the possibility of a divorce in February of 2023? I was told Kayla physically recoiled. "I suggested we attend marriage counseling," she corrected him sharply. "Derek was the one who refused to go." He consulted his notes, then quoted her husband directly, "A divorce would destroy me financially." This was the moment it all spilled out. Mr. Evans pressed Kayla on what she believed Derek meant by being destroyed in a divorce. She locked eyes with him, her voice now hard as steel. "At the time, I assumed he meant emotionally. I understand now he was talking about money. A divorce meant I would receive half of my inheritance. If I died, he got everything. The $3.8 million from my parents, plus an additional $2 million from a life insurance policy he forged my name on, $5.8 million. Evans was a seasoned professional. He didn't so much as blink. He kept pushing. "But you concede the marriage was in trouble?" "Yes," she said. "You concede your husband was under immense financial pressure?" "Yes." "And you concede that you were the one who brought up divorce?" That was the final straw. I could hear the fury explode in her voice from the back of the courtroom. "I suggested counseling," she shouted. He's the one who planned a murder, Evans objected. But the judge let her words hang in the air, a charge that everyone in the room had heard loud and clear. When it was her turn again, Ms. Rossi, the prosecutor, played her ace. The FBI recovered 67 emails from your husband's laptop, she announced as a large screen flickered to life behind her. An unsent draft materialized, dated August 14th, 2023. It was an email Derek had composed to himself. The subject line read, "Final numbers." The body of the message, it was pure, methodical evil. If Kay dies, we'll have $5.8 million total. The text glowing on that screen was not a stray thought. It was a cold, calculated business plan for murder. Madison and I can disappear. Baby born in the Caymans, no extradition for fraud under $10 million. Austin wants $100,000, but he's worth it. Once the policy pays out, we're gone by November. Madison doesn't know about the hitman. She thinks it's fate. Better that way. A collective gasp went through the courtroom, followed by a wrenching sob from someone in the gallery. My eyes shot over to a woman clutching a framed photograph of a smiling young man. I knew her from the news coverage. She was one of the family members of a victim of Flight 447. The prosecutor turned back to the jury. These emails were discovered in Mr. Bennett's deleted items folder. He authored them himself, never sent, but saved. Then she faced Kayla one last time. "Mrs. Bennett," she asked, "did you have any idea, any inkling at all, that your husband was creating a detailed plan to have you murdered?" All Kayla could manage was a choked whisper. "No." Miss Rossi let that one word hang in the air, allowing its full, devastating weight to settle over all of us. No further questions. The defense rested its case on March 15th. Kayla would later tell me that for the next 3 nights, she didn't sleep, her mind haunted by visions of a falling airplane and the faces of the 156 people she would never know. In her closing argument, Ms. Rossi stood before the jury, her voice ringing with conviction. Derek Bennett had a very simple, very greedy plan, she stated. Hire a hitman, ensure his wife was dead, and cash in on $5.8 million. And when that plane went down, she continued, her voice rising, he did not mourn his wife. He pivoted. He saw the horrific deaths of 156 innocent people as the perfect cover story. He filed the insurance claim a mere 4 days later. He kissed his pregnant girlfriend and told her, "Fate gave us a hand." Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that is not the sound of shock. That is not the sound of sadness. That is the sound of a celebration. Ms. Rossi walked closer to the jury box, making eye contact with each member. The defense will tell you that Derek Bennett never laid a hand on his wife, and they are correct. He paid another man $15,000 to do his dirty work. They will argue that he did not cause that plane to crash, and they are correct about that as well. He merely exploited it. He warped a national tragedy into an alibi to conceal his own monstrous intentions. That is attempted murder. That is conspiracy to commit murder. And that is fraud. And that, the prosecutor finished, making eye contact with each member of the jury, is why you must find him guilty as charged. As she took her seat, Mr. Evans rose for the defense. His demeanor was a stark contrast, quiet, almost mournful. "Derek Bennett is a liar and a philanderer," he started, his words silencing the courtroom. "He had an affair. He squandered his wife's inheritance. He concocted a terrible, unforgivable scheme. But he is not a murderer. He never physically harmed Kayla Bennett. That man did not pull a commercial airliner out of the air." Mr. Evans argued, his voice resonating with forced reason. A thought is not a crime. Intent is not a weapon. The state has presented you with a fantasy, a dark wish scribbled in emails. They have not, however, shown you a single moment where Nathan Bennett laid a hand on his wife, because that moment doesn't exist. He paused, letting the silence work for him. This entire case is built on a terrible idea, nothing more. The tell, for everyone who saw Nathan in the hours after the crash, was his reaction. It wasn't the frantic worry of a husband whose wife narrowly escaped death. It was an unsettling cocktail of shock and, beneath it all, a chilling glimmer of relief. It felt wrong, but was it criminal? The defense insisted it was merely human. The prosecution painted it as the cornerstone of their case. For 12 days, the jury remained a mystery, and for those who waited, the world felt like it had stopped spinning. Ashley's best friend, Spencer, would appear with coffee, her face a mask of exhaustion and raw fear that was painful to witness. Brief, coded texts from Officer Miller were the only lifeline to the outside world. Then, on April 2nd, at 9:37 in the morning, the call came from a court clerk. "We have a verdict. Be here by 10:30. By 10:15, the gallery was a pressure cooker of hushed whispers, shared by the press, the grieving families of the flight victims, and Spencer, seated stoically next to Miller. At the defense table, Nathan Bennett seemed to shrink inside his orange jumpsuit, a phantom consumed by the proceedings. His gaze remained fixed on his own hands, folded before him as if they belonged to a stranger. He didn't look up, not once. At 10:47, the judge swept in, a collective rustle as everyone rose, then fell. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a woman with the tired, stern look of a career educator, rose, a single sheet of paper trembling in her grasp. Yes, Your Honor, we have. On count 1, attempted murder in the first degree. How do you find? She turned her gaze directly to Nathan. We, the jury, find the defendant, Nathan James Bennett, guilty. A wave of gasps and stifled sobs broke across the room, cut short by the sharp crack of the judge's gavel. Spencer's hand clamped down on the shoulder of another friend. On count 2, conspiracy to commit murder. How do you find? And there it was again, the final, inescapable word, guilty. On count 3, insurance fraud. Guilty? The verdicts fell one after another, a merciless cadence of accountability. On count 4, theft in the first degree. Guilty. On count 5, wire fraud. Guilty. Nathan's head finally sagged forward, as if the sheer weight of the words had broken his neck. He flinched violently when his attorney, Mr. Evans, placed a hand on his back. The judge thanked the jury, setting the sentencing for April 15th. Outside, a blinding wall of flashbulbs and microphones waited, but there were no words left to say. Officer Miller offered a quick, rigid hug, his own face tight with emotion as Ashley collapsed into his shoulder, her body racked with sobs. The world felt hollow. Weeks later, the courtroom was nearly empty, the media circus having long since packed up and moved on. Nathan was there, a diminished figure in that same orange jumpsuit, his hands trembling. When the judge invited victim impact statements, no one expected it. But it was Ashley. She walked to the podium with an unnerving, absolute calm. She didn't look at Nathan. Her eyes were fixed, unwavering, on the judge. Your Honor, my name is Ashley Bennett. I am 31 years old. I teach English at Lincoln High. Her voice was steady, clear, without a hint of a tremor. I have 3 students who dream of being writers. I have a friend who messages me every morning just to ask if I'm still here. I am alive because a TSA agent trusted her gut. She drew a long, deliberate breath. Nathan didn't just try to have me killed, she stated, her voice gathering force. He tried to delete me. My finances, our life insurance policies, the money my parents left me. He wanted it all gone so he could start over. And when 156 people died on that plane, he didn't mourn. He celebrated. He saw their deaths as his own personal liberation. She finally let her gaze drift from the judge, scanning the small crowd. Her eyes settled for a moment on a woman in her 50s who was clutching a framed photo. Mrs. Thompson, whose 24-year-old son, Daniel, had been on flight 447. Every day that I am given, Ashley declared, her voice echoing in the stillness, is a day I live for the 156 people who were not. I will not let him erase me, and I will not let him erase them. She took her seat. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge slowly, methodically removed his glasses. He stared at Nathan for a full minute, the quiet stretching into an eternity. Mr. Bennett, the judge began, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the tension. I have served on this bench for 23 years. I have seen violence born of passion, of greed, of pure tragic stupidity. But I have never, he paused, letting the weight of the word hang in the air, seen a man view the deaths of 156 innocent human beings as his get out of jail free card. You will spend the remainder of your life learning each and every one of their names. I heard later that the judge calmly put his glasses back on, a final, quiet act before the gavel came down. 20 years for the attempted murder charge, to be followed by another 15 for conspiracy. When all the counts were tallied and stacked consecutively, the final number was 45 years. Nathan Bennett now belonged to the Washington State Department of Corrections. And that was the end of his story. He would be 81 years old before he could even think about parole. As corrections officers led him away, he was a stone carving of a man, chin up, eyes forward, never once glancing at the woman whose life he had tried to extinguish. About a week later, on April 22nd, his girlfriend Jessica took a plea deal. 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years of probation for criminal assistance. On top of the prison time, she was ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution directly to Ashley. Her young son, Connor, was sent to live with his grandmother while she served her sentence. At her own hearing, Jessica wept uncontrollably, insisting she knew nothing of a hitman, nothing of the complex fraud. The judge was unmoved, and Ashley, watching from the gallery, was unmoved as well. When Ashley herself had walked out of that courthouse on April 2nd, 2024, she had faced that same blinding sunlight and sea of cameras. The press swarmed, but she remained silent, a fortress of composure. Officer Miller shielded her with a hug on the courthouse steps as her friend Spencer gripped her hand. But those close to her knew it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the beginning of a different kind of war. For the first month, she all but vanished. She had to abandon the home she and Nathan had shared, a place now tainted, every room a reminder that he had planned her death from their own kitchen table. She found a small, anonymous one-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor in Fremont. It had a view of the water, and, more importantly, it was a place with no ghosts. Her friend Spencer was her anchor, leaving food outside the door on days Ashley wouldn't answer. Officer Miller sent a text every single morning without fail. "You okay?" She was never okay, but she would always type back a single word: "Yes." On May 3rd, Spencer finally convinced her to see a therapist, a Dr. Reed, whose office smelled of coffee and had the same quiet intensity as the judge's chambers. Dr. Reed didn't ask Ashley to recount the horror. Instead, she asked a deceptively simple question: "What do you need?" The answer tumbled out of Ashley before she could even think: "I need to stop dreaming about drowning." The nightmares were brutal and recurring. The same bathtub in the Las Vegas hotel, the hitman holding her under the water as Nathan watched from the doorway, a placid smile on his face. She would wake up choking, the phantom taste of chlorine and champagne in her mouth. Dr. Reed gave her a diagnosis: post-traumatic stress disorder. She explained that it was a perfectly normal response for a survivor, that healing was never a straight line. The first, most crucial step was simply learning how to breathe again, how to feel the solid ground beneath her feet. It started with grounding exercises. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 you can hear. It was a fragile start, but the airport was a different kind of demon. She made an attempt in June, buying a ticket to Portland and making it all the way to the gate. But as they announced her boarding group, her body staged a rebellion. Her lungs seized, her vision narrowed to a pinprick. A flight attendant noticed the stark terror on her face, but Ashley just waved her off, forcing a smile. She turned, walked straight out of the terminal, and bought a ticket for the next Greyhound bus south. Dr. Reed assured her this wasn't a failure. That recovery had its own timeline. The real shift, however, the moment the light began to break through, happened on June 12th. They had dissected everything. Nathan, the trial, Jessica, but had tiptoed around the 156 others. "I can't stop thinking," she finally admitted to her doctor, her voice barely a whisper, "that if I had been on that plane, it might not have crashed. The weight would have been distributed differently. Maybe that one engine part wouldn't have failed." For Nathan, it was supposed to be a masterpiece of an exit, a clean break. As he watched the first anniversary memorial for Flight 447 on a grainy television screen, a victim's mother, Megan Donovan, stood at a podium, barely keeping her voice from shattering. She spoke of the 156 souls lost. And all Nathan could think, with a cold, clear rage, was that his wife was meant to be number 157. The entire grotesque tragedy was supposed to be his ticket to a new life. Then, the woman began a tribute to her son, Ethan, a 24-year-old just trying to get to a bachelor party. Nathan watched her voice crack and saw the room dissolve into a sea of shared grief, and he felt absolutely nothing. His plan had been flawless, elegant in its simplicity. And Ashley, his wife, had single-handedly destroyed it all. In that moment, watching the carefully orchestrated sorrow, he knew his quiet little escape was gone for good. The airline's chief executive officer, David Miller, took the stage next, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a year. He delivered the polished corporate apology, admitting that a maintenance crew had missed a hairline fracture in a fan blade during an inspection on August 15, 2023. For Nathan, this wasn't an apology. It was a resounding validation of his foresight. It proved his entire scheme had been built on the most solid ground imaginable. The chief executive officer called it human error, compounded by procedural failure. Nathan almost let out a laugh. That failure was supposed to be his freedom. While some of the grieving families seemed to accept the explanation, he was just marveling at how exquisitely close he had come to pulling it off. To seal the official narrative, Dr. Emily Vance from the National Transportation Safety Board stepped up. breaking down the technical disaster in terms so simple a child could grasp it. The engine just gave out. It wasn't the pilots, it wasn't the weather, it was a mechanical flaw that should have been caught. Then, at 10:42 in the morning, the exact anniversary of the crash, the announcer's voice cut through the solemnity. We have a special guest. Ashley Bennett was supposed to be on Flight 447. His wife, the woman who haunted his every waking thought. Because of the actions of a Transportation Security Administration officer and her own incredible courage, she survived, the announcer continued. And Nathan could feel the fury rising in his chest. Then came the final brutal twist of the knife. But her survival came at a terrible cost. Her husband attempted to murder her. And just like that, in front of the world, he was no longer a grieving widower. He was a monster. And Ashley, his Ashley, was walking toward that podium, bathed in the glow of manufactured sainthood. Her performance began. "My name is Ashley Bennett," she said, her voice steady. "1 year ago, I was supposed to be on Flight 447. She walked the audience through the entire script. The boarding pass clutched in her hand, the slow shuffle through the security line. She heaped credit upon a Transportation Security Administration agent, Jessica Riley, who she claimed had overheard a phone call and decided to play the hero, pulling Ashley from the queue just 2 hours before the aircraft fell out of the sky. The story the world heard was one of heroism and intuition. The story Ashley lived was one of crushing, suffocating guilt. Weeks after her escape, in the sterile quiet of a therapist's office, the dam finally broke. "Maybe," she confessed to her therapist, Dr. Albright, the words tumbling out through ragged sobs. "Those 156 people would still be alive if I'd just gotten on." Dr. Albright let the silence hang before she offered a lifeline. "Ashley, you are not responsible for a mechanical failure. You are responsible for listening to your instincts. You survived because you listened. That isn't guilt. That's wisdom." The tears that followed were different. They were a release. That July, she took the next step and walked into a support group called Crime Survivors Northwest. Dr. Spencer, the psychologist who ran the sessions, began every single meeting with the same simple promise. This is a space where your story matters. For 3 solid weeks, Ashley just listened. She heard the stories of people like Amelia Peterson, who had finally escaped the husband who terrorized her, and Jacob Miller, who had lived through a shooting at his workplace. The details were different, but the haunted look in their eyes was a perfect mirror of her own. About a month into her silent attendance, Dr. Spencer gently asked if anyone new wanted to chair. Ashley's hand went up. In a quiet, steady voice that betrayed none of the storm inside her, she laid her truth bare. "My name is Ashley," she began. "My husband tried to have me killed. He hired a professional, but I never got on the plane he wanted me to die on." The room was still as she delivered the final blow. That flight crashed, and 156 people died. My husband, Nathan, threw a party to celebrate. In the dead silence that followed, a woman named Chloe reached across the circle, took her hand, and whispered, "You're safe here. That's what matters now." It was soon after that, I'm told, that Ashley began to write down every dark memory she had of Nathan. She filled pages with the kindness of Officer Jess Riley, the woman who had guided her through that initial nightmare. By July, she had 50 pages. By August, it was 200. She gave it a title, The Manifest. Her therapist said that by putting it all on paper, she was finally wresting the power away from Nathan. And on September 1st, the manuscript landed in the inbox of a major New York literary agent, Amanda Cole. Just 2 days later, an email arrived. "I was up all night reading this," it said. "It's one of the most powerful things I have ever read." A bidding war erupted between three major publishing houses. On September 10th, HarperCollins made an offer. Nathan had tried to erase her, to turn her into a ghost. Instead, the entire world was about to learn her name. The book deal came with a check for $150,000. The first calls she made were to the people who had saved her: Chloe, her therapist, and Jess Riley. Jess, the former Transportation Security Administration agent, apparently just broke down on the phone. The two had started a monthly coffee ritual. Jess, now retired after 19 years, admitted she could never look at that security checkpoint again without seeing Ashley's face. They would meet in Queen Anne, and Jess would tell her that if Nathan had been just a little smarter, or if she'd been distracted for even 5 seconds, Ashley would have been on that plane. "But I'm not," Ashley would always whisper back. They chalked it up to trusting your gut and toasted with their paper cups. And through it all, Chloe sent her the same text every single morning, a clockwork reminder: "You're still here." When Ashley was too wrecked by trauma to eat, Chloe would appear at her door with soup. When the apartment felt too quiet, she would come over and they would watch mindless reality television for hours without saying a word. On September 11th, the 1 year anniversary of the crash, Chloe arrived with Thai food and a bottle of wine. Ashley hesitated, mentioning the medication her therapist had prescribed. "One glass won't kill you," Chloe gently pushed, "and tonight, you have something to celebrate." So they raised a glass to the book, to friendship, to being alive. And it was in that exact moment that Ashley saw it. An email from the Flight 447 Families Alliance. The subject line was the 1 year memorial on September 12th, 2025. The email was dated September 11th, 2024. The message was an invitation. "We would be honored if you would speak. Your story is part of theirs now." Ashley froze, staring at her laptop screen. Chloe saw the color drain from her face. "They want me to go back," Ashley said, her voice barely audible. "Back to the airport, on the anniversary." It was the one place on Earth she had sworn she would never set foot in again. That car ride to the airport must have been its own unique version of hell. At 7 in the morning, Chloe was behind the wheel, Jess Riley was in the passenger seat, and Ashley was folded into the back. The parking garage was a sickeningly perfect recreation of her memory. Level 3, Section B. Just the sight of the elevator doors made her feel like her chest was going to collapse. "I can't do this," she finally managed to choke out. From the front seat, Jess turned around. She was in jeans and a blazer, 2 weeks into retirement, but her eyes held the same steel they had a year ago. "You can," she told Ashley firmly. "Those families in there, they need to see you. They need to know their loved ones' deaths weren't just some random accident. You are living proof that justice caught the man who tried to use their tragedy for his own escape." Chloe reached a hand into the back, squeezing Ashley's. "We'll be right there with you," she promised. Ashley took a ragged breath, opened the car door, and walked toward the elevator. The memorial was being held at Gate C7, a space the airline had closed for the day. The Transportation Security Administration had even arranged a special line so the families wouldn't have to endure the normal security screening. It's impossible to imagine what it felt like for her to walk that concourse again, past the same Starbucks and the same newsstand, toward the exact spot where an agent named Jess Riley had grabbed her arm and spoken the words that shattered her world. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." The gate itself looked completely different. There were 156 empty white chairs arranged in perfect silent rows, all facing a small stage. Each chair held a name card. Ashley's eyes found one in the third row. Ethan Donovan, 24. 7 rows behind it, another. Jenna Thompson, 28, from Portland, Oregon. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and roses. Behind the stage, a massive screen cycled through photographs of the lost. Each smiling face appeared for just 3 seconds, a 7-minute and 48-second loop of stolen lives. Nearly 400 people were crowded into the space. Families, friends, somber airline executives, and a handful of reporters standing respectfully at the back. It was then that Megan Donovan, the woman who ran the family's group, walked to the podium. Ashley recognized her instantly from the trial. The woman who had clutched a photo of her son, Ethan, through every moment of testimony. Each face lingered on the massive screen for 3 solemn seconds before dissolving into the next, a 7-minute and 48-second procession of the dead. The ballroom was packed with nearly 400 people, a sea of grieving families, solemn airline executives, and a cluster of journalists observing from the back. At the podium, Megan Donovan, the fierce advocate for the families, adjusted the microphone. Derek watched her, remembering from the trial footage how she had relentlessly clutched a framed photo of her son, Ethan. He knew Kayla recognized her too. A year to the day after his meticulously crafted world had shattered, Derek Bennett found himself at the memorial for Flight 447. He watched Megan Donovan, a mother hollowed out by grief, speak about the 156 souls lost in the crash. But Derek wasn't thinking about them. His mind was fixed on a single searing number. His wife, Kayla, was supposed to have been passenger 157. This public spectacle of sorrow was meant to have been his private, perfect exit. Megan's tribute to her son, Ethan, a 24-year-old on his way to a friend's bachelor party, was a masterclass in heartbreak. Her voice fractured, her shoulders shook, and a wave of weeping moved through the room. Derek felt nothing. It was clinical, a distant observation. His plan had been flawless, a work of art, and Kayla, his own wife, had single-handedly burned it to the ground. In that sterile, silent corner of his mind, he understood that his quiet escape was gone, replaced by a life he never wanted. Next came the airline's CEO, David Miller, a man who looked as though the past year had personally aged him a decade. He delivered the expected, polished corporate apology, his voice resonating with rehearsed sincerity. He admitted that a maintenance check on August 15, 2023, had overlooked a hairline fracture in a fan blade. For Derek, it wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a triumphant validation. It was proof that his blueprint for a new life had been built on a foundation of absolute certainty. Miller called it human error, compounded by procedural failure. Derek fought the urge to smile. That precise failure was supposed to have been his liberation. While other families absorbed the apology with tears and nods, Derek could only fixate on how impossibly close he had come. To finalize the official narrative, Dr. Emily Vance of the NTSB approached the stage, her presence lending a sterile finality to the proceedings. She broke down the complex mechanics of the disaster with a teacher's patience. The engine had simply failed. It wasn't the weather, it wasn't pilot error. It was a catastrophic mechanical issue that should have been caught. Then, as the clock hit 10:42 a.m., the exact moment of impact. The announcer's voice filled the silent room. "We have a special guest. Kayla Bennett was supposed to be on flight 447. His wife. Due to the swift actions of a TSA officer and her own profound courage, she is with us today," the voice continued. A cold fury burned in Derek's chest. Then came the blow he hadn't seen coming. But her survival came at a terrible price. Her husband attempted to murder her. The words hung in the air, and in that instant, 400 pairs of eyes turned him into a monster. And there was Kayla, his Kayla, walking toward the stage, bathed in a spotlight of pure, unblemished sainthood. Her performance began. "My name is Kayla Bennett. 1 year ago today, I was supposed to be on flight 447. She recited the script he knew by heart, the boarding pass clutched in her hand, the walk through the security line. She lavished praise on a TSA agent named Jessica Riley, a woman who had allegedly overheard a phone call and, playing the hero, pulled Kayla from that line just 2 hours before the aircraft fell out of the sky. Derek watched as she singled out the agent in the crowd, a woman already overcome with tears. Then Kayla faced the room, her voice a carefully calibrated weapon. When Derek learned of the crash, she told them, he didn't grieve. He rejoiced. He tried to use their own fallen family, she claimed, to build his alibi. Her voice broke, a perfect, practiced fracture, as she breathed the words, "I'm sorry. Think about that," Derek told me. She apologized for surviving, for her name being on the manifest, for the chaos it caused. She twisted the miracle of her own life into the proof of his guilt. "I will dedicate every day to honoring their memory," she vowed. After a pause that hung in the air like a held breath, the room erupted. They were on their feet, applauding the woman he was accused of trying to kill. After that performance, a pilgrimage began. A line of heartbroken strangers formed, each waiting to touch her, to embrace her, to offer thanks. Derek watched it unfold, focusing on a woman named Ashley, who clutched a photograph, her eyes puffy and bloodshot from a year of unrelenting grief. Ashley explained that her sister Madison, a teacher of 28, had been on that flight. Kayla offered a soft, rehearsed, "I'm so sorry." But Ashley's gaze was hard. "When I heard your husband celebrated," she confessed, "I wanted him dead. I wanted to yell at you." She was talking about my friend. "Why you? And not Madison," she admitted, asking herself. But after hearing Kayla speak, everything had shifted. "You didn't steal her seat," Ashley said, her voice finding its resolve. "He tried to force you into it. He's the monster." They embraced, and in that moment, Derek said, the narrative was cemented. He was the villain. She was the hero. That very afternoon, she boarded a plane for the first time since the disaster, bringing the TSA agent Jessica along for the ride. Derek scoffed telling me this, describing the scene. Kayla's trembling hands, the constant stream of supportive texts from her friend Austin. To him, it was all a calculated performance, a victory lap for her captivated new audience. The true beginning, he told me, arrived as an email. For months, his ex-wife Kayla had been a ghost, shattered by the incident. Then, 2 months later, a single message defined the woman she would become. It was a book deal. The Manifest, a survivor story, slated for release on November 7th, 2024. By November 17th, it hit number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. 47,000 copies sold in a single week. Her agent, Olivia Turner, was calling at 6 a.m., screaming with excitement. Kayla cried, Derek recalled, claiming it wasn't about the money, but about finally telling her truth. No, Derek corrected, his voice empty. She was selling a story built on the ruins of my life. Naturally, television came next. Good Morning America. He saw the host serve up the softball question they'd rehearsed into the ground. How do you survive a husband who wants you dead? Kayla stared directly into the camera. I survived because a TSA officer, Jennifer Riley, listened to her gut. And I survived, she continued, her voice resonating with a newfound theatrical power, because I finally trusted my own. I refused to let him erase me. The soundbite went viral. Book sales surged to number 2. Then, on November 15th, she made her endgame move. She announced the Trust Your Instincts Fund, a nonprofit for women fleeing men like him. The seed money was $300,000 of her book earnings, cash generated from his public execution. Her best friend Sarah joined as treasurer. It was a masterstroke of public image control. Her therapist, Dr. Ross, told a journalist that Kayla was building the sanctuary she never had with Derek. The public devoured it. Donations poured in, over $200,000 from corporations and individuals who had completely bought into her narrative. In a magazine profile, she quoted an email she would cherish forever. Your story saved me. Now I have an escape. Derek just laughed bitterly, convinced she'd written it herself. During a Seattle signing on November 21st, she autographed 214 copies, embracing strangers who wept for her. One woman held up a photo of her sister, murdered by a husband, and thanked Kayla for giving victims a voice. But the encounter that shattered Derek, he said, came from a man at the back of the line, tall, in his late 30s. Hi, I'm Mark, he began. Your book made me realize something. Mark's wife had died in a car accident 3 years prior. He explained that Kayla's story, her choice to truly live, showed him that finding happiness again wasn't a betrayal of his late wife, but a way to honor her. Kayla's simple response was, "Thank you." That, Derek told me, was when he knew it was over. She hadn't just escaped him. She had built an entirely new truth with herself at its center. Then came the new man, Austin. You would assume after everything she'd be hesitant, but she accepted his offer for a date. They met on December 15th, talking for a solid 3 hours. He was an architect with a 7-year-old daughter, Lily, an aspiring artist. His wife passed in March of 2021, the very month Kayla lost her own parents. Life has a twisted sense of humor. Kayla told Austin she couldn't handle anything serious, and he was understanding, suggesting they take it slow. A week later, he brought her and his daughter to see the zoo's Christmas lights. The little girl, Lily, walked straight to Kayla, took her hand, and asked, "Are you the lady from the plane?" Kayla simply answered, "Yes." When Lily asked if she was scared, Kayla replied, "Very, but I'm okay now." Then, looking at Austin, she added, "I'm getting there." And while she was playing the part of the healing survivor, her foundation was booming. Public donations reached $487,000, bringing the total to $787,000. 62 grants had already been awarded. More than 300 women were registered for her upcoming seminar. Her friend Sarah texted her, "You've turned your nightmare into their rescue." Derek just shook his head, recalling it. Then, on January 8th, 2025, his own nightmare truly began. An email landed in Kayla's inbox that would seal his fate. The subject line was chillingly simple. Derek Peterson, cold case investigation. It was from a Detective Miller with the LA County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit. The opening line was a bombshell. Mrs. Peterson, I have reason to believe your ex-husband murdered his first wife. Derek imagined her hands starting to shake. A performance for an audience of one. Derek had a first wife, Amelia. He never hid it. They had a quiet divorce in 2011, and she moved to Arizona. Simple as that. But Miller's email painted a different picture entirely. Amelia Hughes Peterson died February 14, 2011, it stated. Cause: drowning in bathtub with sleeping pills and wine. Ruling: accidental, insurance payout, $1.2 million. The detective's plea was blunt. The patterns are too similar. I need your help. Kayla shut her laptop, called Sarah, and whispered, he did this before. On January 9th, the next day, she called Detective Miller. I will help you. And over the next 4 months, they meticulously constructed the case that would entomb my friend. The prosecution's story began with Amelia, a bright 27-year-old marketing manager who married Derek in 2009. Her sister, Megan, would testify that Amelia became a different person, withdrawn and isolated. Derek claimed it was just pressure from her job, but Megan knew it was more. Then, in January of 2011, Amelia suffered a miscarriage. Derek explained to friends that Amelia just needed space to grieve. Then, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2011, she was found dead. The official report cited Ambien and a blood alcohol level of 0.12. The coroner ruled it accidental, and Derek collected $1.2 million. Megan never believed the official story, but at 25 and lost in grief, her voice was ignored. That changed in November of 2024, the month she read Kayla's book. The descriptions of financial control and isolation mirrored her own memories. She called Detective Miller. The case was reopened, and Amelia's old laptop was pulled from an evidence locker. Suddenly, the FBI managed to recover 67 deleted emails from the laptop's draft folder. One, dated February 10th, 2010, became the prosecution's smoking gun. Once A is gone, the insurance money solves all our problems. Records showed the policy was filed a month later, a full year before Amelia's death. Prosecutors allege the signature was forged using software he would later use on Kayla's paperwork 13 years later. Miller produced cell tower data that placed Derek at the apartment, shattering his alibi of being 60 miles away. In 2025, the man who provided that alibi confessed Derek had paid him to lie. A new forensic pathologist, reviewing the original autopsy photos, discovered what had been missed: petechial hemorrhaging in Amelia's eyes and deep bruises on her shoulders. Classic signs of being forcibly held underwater. The trial began in Los Angeles on June 2nd, 2025. District Attorney Lisa Brennan led the prosecution. Derek's high-priced attorney abandoned him just before the trial, leaving him with a swamped public defender. Amelia's sister, Megan, was the first to take the stand, her voice breaking as she described to the jury how Derek slowly dismantled her sister's world. I lost my sister twice, Megan's voice cracked from the witness stand, every eye in the courtroom fixed on her. Once when she fell for him, and again when he took her from us. Later, an FBI agent methodically guided the jury through the chilling recovered emails. When it was Ashley's turn to testify on July 18th, she was the one who had to connect every last dot for them. The carefully forged documents, the life insurance policies, the entire predatory pattern that had become her life. This was never just a single, horrible mistake, Ashley said, her gaze steady on the 12 faces that held her future and his. This is who he is. Spencer's defense team seemed to crumble under the weight of her testimony. They never stood a chance. On August 12th, 2025, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Just 8 days after that, the judge handed down the sentence that sealed his fate: life in prison with no possibility of parole. Added to the 45 years he was already facing, Spencer, at just 37 years old, was going to die inside a concrete cage. Through it all, he just stared blankly at the floor. For Ashley, the long, terrifying performance was finally over. On September 11th, she drove out to the quiet green of the cemetery to Amelia's grave. She found Megan already there, waiting for her. They stood together before a polished granite headstone engraved with the name Amelia Marie Hughes. "Thank you," Megan whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that went beyond gratitude. "For finding the courage to tell your story, for helping me get justice for her." Ashley could only shake her head. "She saved my life," she replied softly. "I only wish I could have done the same for her." Megan reached out and took her hand, her grip firm. "You did," she insisted. And in that shared silence, they finally closed the last chapter on a life cut tragically short. "You made sure the world knows exactly what kind of monster he is," her therapist, Dr. Evans, told her weeks later. "That's how you honor the people we've lost, by refusing to allow their stories to be forgotten." That December, I heard Ashley took a trip to Hawaii with her new partner, a good man named Mark, and her friend Megan. For the first time since she'd met Spencer, stepping onto that airplane, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She spent the flight looking out at the endless blue of the ocean, thinking of all the people who had pulled her back from the brink. As the plane touched down on the tarmac, Megan squeezed her hand and asked a simple question. "Ashley, are you happy?" She told me later that for the first time in what felt like an entire lifetime, she could turn, smile without faking it, and honestly say, "Yes, I really am." In its first year alone, her Trust Your Instincts Fund provided escape and resources for over 1,200 women, raising $2.1 million for the cause. By that December, she had returned to teaching full-time and had even enrolled in a Master of Social Work program. And Mark asked her to move in with him. She said yes without a moment's hesitation. From the cross-country flight that was designed to be her disappearance and the relationship that nearly erased her, she said she learned 3 lessons that would define the rest of her life. First, always trust your gut. It is the one voice that will never lie to you. Second, tell your story, no matter how hard it is, because someone out there is starving to hear it. And third, just making it out alive isn't the end of the race, it's the damn starting line. It's still hard for me to talk about, even all this time later. I had to watch my best friend Nathan get his heart methodically ripped out of his chest because he saw something his wife, Ashley, just refused to. She'd let this new guy, Spencer, into their lives. And while I know she felt deep down that something was off, she was so desperate to believe he was just a supportive, wonderful friend. But Nathan saw him for exactly what he was: a parasite, meticulously cutting her off from everyone who loved her, even weaving his way into her finances. It was a waking nightmare to see Nathan try to sound the alarm, only to be systematically painted as the jealous, controlling husband. Nathan still believes the truth had to come out, if for no other reason than to save another person from that special kind of hell. But the absolute cruelest cut was watching Ashley's own family turn on him. They sided with Spencer, swallowing every calculated lie he fed them. They helped him destroy my friend. For what felt like 8 years, Ashley was just gone. She was a ghost, trapped inside the suffocating bubble Spencer had built around her. The day she finally broke her silence about what he'd been doing behind closed doors wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the first crack of light in the wreckage, the first step she took to claw her way out. For Nathan, it was the validation he'd prayed for, but it came heartbreakingly late. I've stood by my buddy through some incredibly tough times, but nothing will ever compare to the utter devastation I saw in him after he and Ashley finally split for good. He told me, his voice hollow, that he honestly felt like his life was over. But Ashley, she took the horror Spencer put her through and forged it into a weapon, a lifeline for others. She started a foundation that has since helped, I don't know, more than 200 women escape the exact same nightmare she survived. Nathan is proud of her for that. I know he is. But hearing that she eventually found someone else, a new life, man, it's a constant, brutal reminder for him that her devastating, near fatal ending became a brand new beginning, just not one that included him. What really gets me, what keeps me up at night, is how terrifyingly close Nathan came to losing her for good. He told me the whole story, how Ashley was physically at the airport, standing in the TSA line with a one-way ticket Spencer had manipulated her into buying. She was just minutes away from vanishing forever. But Nathan, who hadn't slept in days, had finally found it. A chain of 67 emails between them. It was Spencer's entire disgusting playbook, laid out in black and white. He drove like a madman to the airport and shoved that undeniable proof right into her hands. That's what it took. It's a chilling thought, because most of us can't afford to wait for proof that clear. I think I'll be telling Nathan's story for the rest of my life as a warning. There are so many predators like Spencer out there, and they all read from the same script. If you ever want a textbook example of what the red flags look like, just look at what happened to my best friend. The single most vital lesson I learned from watching his life implode is the one thing I hope you take away from this. Nathan's gut feeling about Spencer was right from day one. That instinct you have, that little voice in your head, is the most powerful defense you will ever have. Please, for the love of God, learn to listen to it